Chapter 466. The next time he saw AI Ching was 6 years later in Vienna. She walked on the red carpet with her crutches and walked into the golden hall that Huaisher once dreamed of. Standing next to her piano, she received applause and praise from the world. Huaisher and the teacher sat below the stage. They witnessed the arrival of the peak of her life. "Are you envious?" The teacher sitting next to him asked. "If you hadn't given up, you might be standing here now." "To be honest, a little." Huaisher nodded and then shook his head indifferently. "But I missed it all, didn't I?" "It's not too late to pick up the cello again," the teacher said. "It doesn't matter if you start from scratch. I've recently retired, and I'm very free." Thinking about it, it's still very difficult. Huaisher smiled bitterly and looked down at his calloused hands. "To be honest, I'm already rusty with about technique, and I don't have time to learn from scratch." "Is the Northwest very busy?" "The water project is very troublesome, and the budget is not enough. Many times, I have to do it myself." Huaisher shrugged. "To be honest, I rarely take a bath. This time I washed several times in the hotel, and I felt that my hair and feet were full of the smell of dirt. Coming here, I feel rustic, and I'm ashamed to Shao Qing." Over the years, he wandered around the world like a vagrant. He saw too many people who were once as helpless as he was. Even if they tried their best to do something within their power, it was still not enough. What could a person accomplish with all his strength? Compared to the really huge difficulties, the money that was enough for a person to live a lifetime without worrying about food and clothing was still too small. It could not even bring a trivial water source to the stranded villages in the wilderness. He could only try again, but the results were very little. "It's good that you can come." The teacher patted his knee and stared at his daughter on the stage. "How was your chat backstage just now?" "A few words." Huaisher shook his head. "It's been too long. We're too unfamiliar with each other. Instead, we don't know what to talk about. We can only greet each other like strangers. Every time she's so cold, it always makes me wonder if I did something wrong back then. Everyone makes mistakes. If a person can't even make a mistake in life, that would be too sad." The teacher comforted him. "Although most of the time I feel that it was a mistake for you to give up the cello, sometimes I think that if you didn't give up, you might not have achieved what you have today, and you wouldn't have been able to help so many people. The student aid program, Dawn Education, and the Water Source Project. Many people have succeeded because of you. Huaisher, you don't have to be depressed. You should hold your head high for them." Huaisher nodded and said nothing more. "The performance is over. Let's go backstage to pick her up." The teacher slowly got up. Huaisher reached out to support her. Only then did he realize that there were wrinkles on the back of her hand. Unknowingly, her hair gradually revealed a trace of white. Huaisher was stunned. "I'm old. Is this something to be surprised about?" The teacher chuckled softly. "You're only 50 years old. You're still young," Huaisher said. "You're the ones who are still young." The teacher said, "You still have a chance to make mistakes before you get old." She never knew how to speak softly and treat people with gentleness. No matter how rebellious a child was, she could always guide them on the right track with a smile. As long as she was behind him, Huaisher could move forward with confidence. But a year later, he suddenly received news that his teacher was critically ill. She had a sudden cerebral hemorrhage. It was said that she fell when she was going down the stairs. At that time, Huaisher was at the construction site when he received a call from AI Ching. When the other end of the phone told him the news, he was stunned. He stood there in disbelief. At that time, everyone was still celebrating the completion of the project. In the jubilant atmosphere, Huaisher sat on the ground. A few confused children surrounded him and wanted to pull him up, but they felt that this uncle was like a stone, so heavy and without any warmth. Huaisher said goodbye to his colleagues in a daze. He took a 6-hour car ride to the airport. After waiting for midnight, he took a plane to Exine. When the plane finally rose from the ground, he suddenly remembered what his teacher had once said. No matter how attractive art is, it can't be compared to things that are more direct and heavier. Huaisher, art is floating in the clouds, but there will always be people who can adapt to a floating life and will choose to step on the ground. When he chose to step on the ground, he couldn't find a place to feel safe. But when he flew into the clouds again, he realized that he couldn't find a place to return. He covered his face and finally let out a muffled cry, like a child who had lost his mother. When Huaishir arrived at the room, his teacher was already awake. It was like he had used up all the good luck in his life. It was a false alarm. Outside the room, after he heard about the situation, he collapsed to the ground. Sweat poured down his back. His hands trembled as he climbed up, and he could not help but laugh like an idiot. When Ai Ching accompanied him inside the room, he grabbed the doctor's hand and asked about his condition again and again. Then he asked about the things that he should pay attention to. The doctor seemed to have seen his share of questions. He only patted his shoulder and waited for him to calm down. He sat on the chair outside the room and waited blankly until the door was pushed open and Ai Ching walked out with a walking stick. She told him, "Mother's waiting for you inside." He hesitated for a long time, but he could not summon up the courage. Suddenly, someone kicked him from behind. It was Ai Ching. "You keep hesitating. It's so annoying." She closed the door. Huaishir was stunned for a long time. Her leg is healed? When was it? 2 years ago. She had the surgery. The old woman on the bed spoke. "I wanted to tell you, but she stopped me. She kept thinking about when it would be like this." "Hi, you must be scared, right?" The old woman's pale face squeezed out a mischievous smile. He did not know that she was referring to his condition, or to Ai Ching's recovery. Huaishir was stunned for a long time. Finally, he could not help but breathe a sigh of relief. "Teacher, it's good that you're fine. It's just a fall. There's no need to make a fuss." The teacher shook her head. "You walked too far, didn't you? It took you so long to walk. If I were critically ill, I wouldn't even be able to see you for the last time." "I'm sorry." Huaishir lowered his head. The teacher on the bed laughed. "Saying sorry means that you think you've made a mistake. You seem to always make mistakes, Huaishir." "Yes." Huaishir nodded. "But in a person's life, they have to do something right, don't they?" In the long silence, Huaishir was stunned. He could not refute, but he did not know what to say. He could only lower his head. "I'm sorry. What have you done to me this time, Huaishir?" The old woman shook her head. "The things you've done over the years. Dawn Education, the Northwest Water Conservancy Project, and the Student Aid Program. Are these things wrong? Everyone is grateful for the help you do for them. Huaishir, but have you forgotten yourself? You just haven't found it yet." "I know." The old woman sighed. "But before helping everyone, shouldn't you help yourself first? Why can't you look back occasionally when you're walking forward?" The old woman looked into his eyes and whispered, "Look at me. Look at Xiaoqing. Look at your friends, because we're also looking at you, waiting for you to come back one day." Huaishir was stunned. In the silence, the old woman listened to the music on the TV and hummed softly. "How man's roads must a man walk down? How many roads did a person have to walk to become a man?" Huaishir did not know. But at this moment, he had an unprecedented regret and uneasiness. He had walked such a long road, and how long had he made those people who were staring at him wait? Was it so important to become a man? Over the years, he had traveled around the world in fear and confusion, like a wandering soul with nowhere to go. Even if he had done all he could to do those things, could it really make him feel satisfied? Huaishir, love makes people choose to wait. The teacher suddenly whispered, "But don't let the people who love you wait too long." At that moment, he finally came to a realization. "Do you understand?" The old woman smiled and gently raised her hand to comb his hair. She was full of joy. Go, do the right thing. You still have the possibility to save all of this before you really get old." Huaishir looked at the teacher reluctantly, turned around, and ran away. He almost bumped into Ai Ching, who had just entered the door. "Are you crazy?" Ai Ching looked at him, running away in shock. She looked back at her mother blankly. "What's wrong with him? Is he on drugs?" The old woman on the hospital bed laughed. "Probably. He's finally grown up." Huaishir ran in the wind. He pulled off the cumbersome backpack and threw it aside. He tore off his bow tie and ran with all his might. As if instinctively, he rushed to a certain place where someone was, to the place where she was waiting for him, until he was so tired that he could not breathe and staggered forward. He finally found the silhouette in his memory that was becoming clearer and clearer. She was still there. When he looked back in shock, he saw the face that he had not seen for a long time. The sincere outline of the young man still remained, even if he was in such a sorry state. For a moment, Huaisher felt an unprecedented joy. Thank God, she was still here. Huaisher used the last of his strength, took a deep breath, and summoned all of his courage. Fui, he said, I have something to tell you. From then on, it was a long time. The end. One of them. Then, at the moment when everything came to an end, time started again, and everything was renewed. Huaisher opened his eyes again and heard a familiar voice. Name? Chapter 467. In the Persian region, the former capital of the country, the garrison of the Roman army. It was noisy outside the tent, but it was silent inside the large tent. All the curtains in the conference room were drawn. In the darkness, a ray of light shot out from the projector and shone on the screen, showing the complicated resume from the other side. The high-ranking generals of the garrison in the Persian region, the commissioner from Constantine, and the emissary from the Imperial Guard, as well as the elite senior law enforcement officers, sat behind the table, listening to the explanation of the intelligence department. This is the goal of our joint operation this time, and it is also the biggest unstable factor in the entire southern region of Persia. The emissary stood next to the screen and pointed to the vague silhouette that appeared between the files. He said in a solemn voice, For a long time, he and his integrated front have been entrenched in the southern mountain region, causing us a lot of trouble. Because of him, the overall international oil price dropped by 6% in April last year. All this time, he has caused more than 100 billion dinars of losses to the garrison, and the direct or indirect deaths of nearly 600 garrison soldiers have been close to 600. Haven't you tried bombing? The commissioner of Constantine asked. He was not an amateur commander, but he represented the Senate to ask questions to the garrison. Everything must have a clear and definite answer. Why would such a person become a big problem for the empire? Thanks to this guy's continuous attacks, the budget of the garrison had been constantly increasing every year. At the same time, more importantly, after a long political struggle, there was a proposal to withdraw the army in the Senate. For oil, Rome and the Russian Federation had been in the same land for too long. Both sides were gradually exhausted. It is difficult for us to determine their location, the commentator replied. The integrated front and the local forces are very close, and the whereabouts of the person in charge are uncertain. We are still unable to determine his identity. No one knows what his name was, or where he came from. We only know that, for years ago, he appeared in Baghdad, entered a restaurant, and after making a speech on the spot, was invited to his house by the listeners, who offered him all they had, and entreated him to guide them, but he did not take a penny from them. Instead, he traveled all over Persia and preached. At first, we thought he was just a fraud, but when we realized it, a new terrorist organization had formed in the Baghdad area. Everyone fanatically followed him, believing that he could bring a new order to this land. What happened after that was just as you can see from the report. He continuously brought us huge losses. Have you considered a surrender plan? The messenger of the Imperial Guard asked. This group of members of the Roman Empire's Secret Service was best at dirty tricks like this. When soldiers fought and sacrificed on the front lines, there were countless instances of them reaching a settlement with drug traffickers. If it was useful, things wouldn't have turned out this way. The narrator sighed. Most of the envoys we sent out had their ears cut off and sent back. Some of the more serious ones never returned. Killed? The Senate commissioner frowned. No, it's even more humiliating. The narrator's expression was gloomy. They betrayed their country and chose to stand against the citizens. There was a Lawrence of Canaan. Someone below laughed softly. Even if there's no information, doesn't this person have a name? How should others address him? A mysterious man? You know how? It was a joke that no one could laugh at. The lawyer. After a short silence, the narrator said indifferently, Everyone calls him the lawyer. They think that he will adjust the tone of a piano and return everything to the right track. It sounds really elegant. The commander who had just sneered raised his eyebrows. Unfortunately, it ends here. This is your mission, Mr. Red Gloves. The general of the Persian garrison said, We have determined the current location of him, and is confident through insider information. There are only two of them, far away from their own army and subordinates. They're at their weakest. Your mission is to bring him back intact. I want him alive. Do you understand? Capture the lawyer alive? The captain of the special forces with the internal code name Red Gloves asked, "Is it necessary?" "Why not?" The general asked, "If we can control the lawyer, the integrated front can become a sharp blade in our hands, a sharp blade to deal with the Russian Federation. Do you understand? This time, we can't make any mistakes." "I understand." The Red Gloves slowly stood up and picked up the mission brief that was given to him. He slowly put on his gloves and saluted to the officers present. "We will do our best." The general stood up. "For Rome." "Well, back to Rome." The Red Gloves turned and walked out of the conference room. Outside the tent, the action team members who were armed to the teeth had been waiting for a long time. The elite team formed by the combination of the Imperial Guards and the law enforcers waited quietly. They stood under the scorching sun like ghosts. They were about to dissipate in the rising heat. When the Red Gloves woke up again, he felt that the world was upside down. He was hanging in the air, dying. In the darkness, there was only the sound of him gasping for breath. The elites selected from the whole of Rome, the elites jointly created by the Imperial Guards and the law enforcers, the soldiers who were like ghosts had all become ghosts at this moment. It was incredible in the hands of a woman. Yes, a woman. At the beginning of the operation, everything went smoothly. They broke through the village with irresistible force and came in front of the lawyer. When the man raised his hands and surrendered, everyone ignored the woman behind him, the trusted assistant who exuded a harmless aura. He allowed her to walk within 10 steps of him with her bare hands. At that time, they didn't know what kind of monster had stepped into their hunting ground. When the dagger pierced out from the darkness and cut off his hands, he finally felt a wave of despair and fear amidst his shock. Unbelievable. Now, the gentle face of the woman appeared in front of him again, making him almost stop breathing in fear. "Xiaoxian, you scared him." Next to her, someone sighed helplessly in Dongxiao language. "Why did you leave only one alive?" "It's convenient. I can't help it." The person called Xiaoxian raised her hand and gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. Then, she smiled and raised the plate in her hand. "I just made dinner. Do you want to eat some?" "Don't tease him, and don't feed my captive that kind of food that will kill people." "Didn't I catch him?" Xiaoxian argued. "Now he's mine." A low voice gradually approached, mixed with the sound of a chair being dragged on the ground. A weather-beaten middle-aged man sat in front of him. His thin and tall body was deeply wedged into the Red Gloves' eyes like engravings. His calm and cold posture was unforgettable after a glance. What was more eye-catching than his temperament was his pitch-black eyes, which seemed to be burning with ghost fire. He had long black hair, but it was mixed with wisps of gray, which made him look even more weathered. It was obvious that his face used to be handsome and dignified, but now it had become so dignified and cold that people didn't dare to look at him directly. Black eyes and black hair? Is he a Roman? Immediately, the Red Glove came to his senses. Through the tanned skin, he saw the original color of the man. Because of this, he was even more stunned. "Asian? An Asian? Nice to meet you, Mr. Red Glove." The man called the tuner sat in front of him and stared at him calmly. He introduced himself. "You can call me the tuner. I'm just a traveler who happened to pass by." It was as if he was telling a joke, but it was hard to laugh. "Don't worry, I won't kill you, nor will I torture you. The things that you Romans like to do won't happen to you." After a short silence, he said calmly, "I want to talk to you about everything that the Romans and the Russian Federation have done to this land. Everything that originally had nothing to do with me." The Red Glove originally wanted to sneer. He should have been disdainful. However, when the man spoke, he couldn't help but want to listen. He felt curious and some kind of indescribable attraction. It was as if someone had raised a torch in the dark and told him the truth. He should have chosen to commit suicide at that moment, if he still had the slightest bit of loyalty to Rome. Unfortunately, it was too late. He heard what the man in front of him said to him, about position, about responsibility, about the country, and about the responsibility of a person who was born into this world, about how to be a man. about justice. A month later, the Red Glove returned to the garrison camp. He was alone. He was the last survivor of the combat team that had disappeared without a trace. The moment he was discovered, he was taken to the infirmary and carefully examined. He was healthy. The people of the Integrated Front did not abuse him. Even his broken right hand was sutured properly and exploded. Then, the military officers repeatedly questioned and interrogated him in the confinement room, questioning him about everything that had happened to him. From beginning to end, the Red Glove did not say a word. He just closed his eyes. But when he occasionally opened his eyes, they were cold and fanatical, as if he was ready to sacrifice himself for the truth. 18 hours later, after harsh interrogation and trying various drugs, the interrogators gave up all their attempts on the Red Glove in frustration. And after another 8 hours, after a short sleep and food, the Red Glove walked into the conference room. As the emissary of the Integrated Front, he saw the people he had seen before. "Tell me why you're here, former Red Gloves." The garrison general, who held the report of the losses these days, said indifferently, "Just like your former colleagues. Tell me," the request of the lawyer, "what does that lunatic want from our hands?" "Basic order, clean drinking water, and insignificant medicine." The Red Glove laughed. "What we want, no, what the suffering people of this land desire, is that simple." Chapter 468. The Paradise of Heaven. It was unknown when people started calling the land that way. Clean drinking water, an order that allowed people to walk on the streets without worry during the day, and hepatitis B vaccines. Things that were insignificant to people from other places, things that were as common as air, were precious here like oases in the wasteland. But in the end, the beautiful paradise was short-lived. 6 years later, the situation between Rome and the Russian Federation became increasingly tense. A sudden bombing burned everything to the ground. On that day, the blackbirds that whistled past sowed the seeds of hatred on the scorched earth and reaped the rising flames. Everything fell to the edge of losing control. What used to be a paradise was now nothing but ruins. Under the suppression of the joint action of the two countries, only the last resistance was still trying in vain to save everything. There was a loud roar of bombs in the distance. The waning sunset shone in through the broken window, illuminating the blood on Huaishir's forehead and his white hair that was dyed red with blood. At this point, there was nothing more to be done. He lowered his head and lit the last cigarette. "You should go, Xiaoxian," Huaishir said softly. "The beautiful war that was worth your sacrifice is over. You have finished the road you should take. So it's time to leave." In the reflection of the broken glass, the dim light shrouded his head, just like a broken crown. "Only the crown of unrighteousness remains for me." He laughed at himself. Behind him, in the shadow where the sun could not reach, a gentle figure walked out silently and looked down at him. "Do you want me to avenge you?" "Avenge?" Huaishir couldn't help but laugh. "This achievement, isn't the paradise on earth created with my expectations? When I die, this undeserved miracle will return to nothingness with me. Do I still have any injustice worth taking revenge on?" "No unwillingness?" Luo Xian asked. Huaishir shook his head. "No. No regrets. No." So Luo Xian chuckled softly and stroked his cheek. "But you're not satisfied, right?" "Yeah." Huaishir closed his eyes and murmured, "How can I be satisfied, Xiaoxian? How can we make salvation last forever?" "Who knows?" Luo Xian shook her head slowly and looked at him. "These are not things that I should be thinking about, but at least I know that I should do something about it." "That's enough." "Is that really enough?" Huaishir asked. "Who knows?" Luo Xian took a step back, turned around, and walked out of the door. The faint sound of gunshots could be heard from outside. Before the door was pushed open, Huaishir couldn't help but raise his head and stare at her back. "Xiaoxian, did you really get happiness?" Luo Xian's footsteps paused slightly. "Who knows?" Once again, he used the same words to answer his question. The woman turned around, twirled her hair, and gave him a final smile. "If there really was one, it must have been because of you." She said goodbye, Huaishir. "Yes." Huaishir lowered his eyes. "Goodbye, Xiaoxian." The door closed. The The sound of gunshots rang out and quickly returned to silence. The sound of gunshots rang out again. The roar stopped abruptly and repeated itself. Finally, in the roar, everything returned to silence. Only the sound of footsteps could be heard approaching, bit by bit. In the end, the broken door fell into the dust. The masked soldiers filed in and aimed their dark muzzles at the man in the chair. Even if he was left alone, he was still so vigilant. He was ready for battle. Low footsteps came in from outside the door. The blood-stained sergeant crossed the forest of guns and walked to Huaishur. He looked down at his weathered face and gray hair and asked coldly in Latin, "Lawyer?" Was he calling him? Huaishur didn't know, but he couldn't help laughing. Mina Ozymandias king of kings. Huaishur raised his eyes and stared at the destroyers in front of him. He also stared at the fallen paradise and whispered softly, "Luke in me works, ye mighty, and despair. Nothing Besides remain. Round the decay, I am the king of kings. I have unparalleled achievements. I dare to subdue the heavens. Other than that, there is nothing." Just like that, he raised his pistol and aimed it at the enemy in front of him. Huaishur pulled the trigger. The rumbling of gunshots rang out and engulfed him like a rainstorm. In the sudden darkness, he smiled and fell on his back. In his hand, the pistol that spat out colorful flags fell into the gradually spreading pool of blood. Around the ruins of paradise, only yellow sand was left. Loneliness and desolation stretched out in all directions. The end, 19, Death of the Pharaoh. As the melodious sound of the cello slowly came to an end, a tidal wave of applause came from the Golden Hall. On the stage, the overly young man nodded and stood up. He held the cello and bowed to the audience below the stage. However, he suddenly realized that he had unknowingly climbed to a peak that he had never thought of before. The Star of Tomorrow. Almost everyone called him that. However, this praise made Huaishur feel stunned and absent-minded from time to time. Was such a praise really talking about him? Or was it that he was really qualified to bear such a heavy responsibility? Was it not too much of a joke? Or was it that he had unknowingly become strong to such an extent? Congratulations, Huaishur. When Huaishur walked out from the backstage, Elder Zhao, who had been waiting for a long time, came forward and hugged him tightly. He hugged his most outstanding student and praised him generously. "You are indeed more talented than I thought. It's all because of your good teaching. All right, you two stop flattering each other." The old professor of the Vienna Academy of Music watched from the side and couldn't help but laugh. Let's go drink some wine and celebrate. I know an old bastard has a bottle of good stuff that has been hidden for 20 years. Today, we have to make him take it out no matter what." "Teacher, didn't you quit drinking?" Elder Zhao asked. "Today is a good day for students. We have to celebrate." The old professor took out his car keys and waved in front. Let's go. Huaishur and Elder Zhao looked at each other, shook their heads helplessly, and followed him. However, when he left, his footsteps paused. At the exit of the audience, a familiar silhouette emerged from the crowd. She sat in a wheelchair and silently left the crowd. When she noticed his gaze, she looked back, nodded slightly, and silently disappeared into the crowd. Huaishur froze in place. He felt like he had seen her before, but he couldn't tell where. "Huaishur, what's wrong?" Elder Zhao in front of him looked over. "No, nothing." Huaishur shook his head, withdrew his gaze, and turned away. On this day, he finally took a solid step on the path of life that he had always dreamed of. There was also a future full of glory and applause waiting for him. Occasionally, when he woke up from his dream, Huaishur would sit up in the chair and quietly stare at the night view of the foreign country outside the window. He couldn't help but think, will I really feel happy with such a life? However, this was just an insignificant thought among countless absurd thoughts. It wasn't worth mentioning. "What's wrong?" His wife, who had just woken up, hugged his neck from behind and gently lowered her head. "Nightmare? I just can't sleep. Don't worry." Huaishur patted her hand, drank the last of the wine in the glass, returned to the bed, and fell asleep again. The end, 46. The ideal future. Accompanied by the roar of the gunshot, the old man of the Een family fell in a pool of blood. In the crisp sound of the bullet's shell falling to the ground, Huaisher looked down at the old face that was in disbelief until death. However, he didn't feel happy, and he couldn't see any difference between the way he died and other people died. After all, people were the same after death. He dragged the chair, stepped over the corpse under his feet, and sat in front of the door. He quietly stared at the manor in front of him. Tragic screams, and gunshots faintly came from afar. An orderly extermination was underway. In the end, everything returned to silence. Finally, Yu Dongri walked out from behind the door, with half his body covered in blood. He lowered his head and reported to him, "All the people of the Een family have been wiped out, but we found 2 children." Huaisher raised her head and looked at him in confusion. That calm gaze made Yu Dongri couldn't help but stiffen. He felt a chill all over his body. "Are you saying something wrong?" Huaisher asked him in confusion. If all the people of the Een family were wiped out, there wouldn't be a situation like the 2 children left. If we have to use our brains because of the children, wouldn't we need to open another fast lane for the disabled? "I understand." Yu Dongri nodded and turned to leave. After the 2 abrupt noises, there were no more unpleasant noises. Only a tranquil silence was left. Huaisher took a deep breath of the sweet air and closed his eyes. The end 92. Washing blood with blood. Tomorrow's news. Yingzhou District headlines, "Monsters from Dongxiao Land in Kyushu. The executioner with a blood debt is closing in on China. The new head of the Rigian family will go to Kansai. The sword of disaster. Huaisher takes over Osaka. His Excellency, the great commander of the Guojin family, has approached Kansai. The people cheer as the Supreme General arrives in Kyoto." The end 644. The road to the king's arrival. On the television, the host announced happily, recently, the famous cellist Huaisher and the pianist AI Qing got married. The end 430. Green sun for a day, green sun for life. Go and tell Huaisher that Yu Dongri is a traitor. Little Qing. In the southernmost part of the realm, in the endless wind and snow, the Wanxiang heavenly sphere was operating, and the terrifying heat melted countless ice and snow. Here, a huge amount of source substance was burning every moment, and endless possibilities were spreading, and weaving. But now, even the program of the New World had reached a critical point. It couldn't bear the burden. Among them, the branches of things that had unfolded were about to break through the tens of thousands of checkpoints. But they were still spreading wildly, and endless variables were accumulating and erupting from them. The stack is about to overflow. In the ear-piercing warning, St. raised his head in astonishment and looked at the young man, floating in the shadow of the heavenly sphere. Unbelievable. Why are there so many possibilities in his life? Chapter 469. It was as absurd as a dream. Although what was prepared for Huaisher was the highest level of simulation, this number was still too exaggerated. No matter how outstanding the tester was in the past, they could only develop a dozen or so branches from it. How could there be someone like him, wandering between new branches almost every day? If there was nothing strange about him, would he have been chosen by the Book of Destinies? Crow calmly said, "Continue, increase the intensity, don't stop." "It has to stop." KP shook his head. "This is no longer the level of SAN value reaching 0. Even if he can hold on until the end, Huaisher's personality will probably be worn down by the endless branches. His soul can't withstand such a huge pressure. No, he can." Crow looked straight at him and told him word by word. "He is the contractor I personally chose, but this level of torture is not worth mentioning to him." KP was speechless. He raised his hand and pulled the handle in front of him to the end. And in the shadow of the celestial sphere, the young man who was immersed in countless branches let out a painful roar. It was as if he had become dozens, hundreds, tens of thousands of himself at the same time, immersed in countless changes in his life at the same time. The torrent that was enough to burn any supercomputer in a scrap metal swallowed his soul, pulled him down, and fell into every wildly expanding branch. He saw, experienced, and witnessed tens of thousands of himself. Tens of thousands of Huaisher. Huaisher who gave up on his ideals. Huaisher who sacrificed his ideals. Huaisher who became a cello player. Huaisher who became a mediator. Huaisher who became a scum. Huaisher who became a saint. Huaisher who became a terrorist. Huaisher who became a savior. In this reincarnation pain that even burning and dismembering couldn't compare to, he felt that he was about to split. One for many. The soul that was about to collapse would be pulled by endless possibilities, turning into tens of thousands of different sides, difficult to be pieced together again. But at that moment, the wildly expanding branches came to an abrupt stop. He was stuck. It wasn't that there was no longer any possibility of survival. Instead, it was blocked and cut off by some kind of almost absurd and almost impossible bizarre branch. It was unable to continue the simulation and deduction. It was as if he was warning them. That was the end. Because this was the end. Immediately after, endless darkness and intense light flowed out from within, covering the tens of thousands of branches. In the image transmitted by the final branch, the figure standing in the abyss seemed to have sensed that someone was spying on him from afar. In the darkness, a pair of eyes slowly lifted and looked over. It was as if a character in a story had stopped the pages from turning and raised his head to look at the readers in front of him. He seemed to be smiling. "You guys are really bored." Accompanied by the silent opening and closing of his lips, a deep voice reverberated in everyone's ears. Then, the figure bent his finger and casually flicked it. The operation of the myriad heavenly sphere came to an abrupt halt. Separated by a distant time, he easily pushed aside this prying from the past and nothingness, and the final branch quietly retreated into the chaos. Only a solemn and cold silhouette was left in a glimpse. "What is that?" In a long silence, the DM raised his head stiffly. "That is also Huaisher." Crow sighed softly. "The one I don't want to see the most is Huaisher." A shattering sound suddenly rang out. Following the flicking of that finger, it was as if there was an invisible force of gravity bursting forth, breaking free from all shackles, pulling all the branches extending from Huaisher's body to contract, close, and overlap again, combining into one. The future of nothingness collapsed and dissipated, returning to one point. In a trance, Huaisher was stepping forward. It was as if he was dragging something indescribably heavy, pulling thousands of himself, causing those split phantoms to return to one place. With every step forward, it became easier and easier. In the end, it was as if he was galloping in the endless light and darkness, looking down at the huge tree-shaped diagram under his feet, shuttling through the possibilities of every future. From splitting to merging, but this time there seemed to be something different. His soul smoothly operated in the world of nothingness, forgetting fear and uneasiness, the past and the future, forgetting where he was and forgetting who he was. After throwing away those hindrances, only the pure essence was left. After stripping away all the insignificant things, even the existence of the soul became insignificant, leaving only a tiny source point. In the next moment, the huge myriad heavenly sphere suddenly shook. A brand new branch suddenly appeared, pulling Huaisher's essence into it. Light swallowed him. Perhaps the afternoon sun stung Huaisher's eyes, but he subconsciously raised his hand to block his eyes. When he looked around, he heard the roar of a waterfall rushing down from the canyon in the distance. A fresh wind blew from afar, mixed with the fragrance of grass and trees, and there was a faint smell of sulfur in the water vapor. After walking forward for a while, he could see the boiling hot spring among the rocks in the distance, and the green behind him seemed to extend to the end of his sight. Huaisher carried his travel backpack, suddenly not knowing where he was. "Are you shocked?" Beside him, a young male traveler smiled and patted him on the shoulder. "Welcome to Yellowstone Park, friend. America welcomes you." America! Yellowstone. There seemed to be something throbbing in his heart. He gradually understood in a trance. Yes, this was America, and he had come to the place with the most beautiful scenery. Forgetting to remember his purpose, he carried his backpack and instinctively walked forward along the road, looking around at the lake that was as smooth as a mirror in the distance. Under the reflection of the sunlight, the colorful rocks at the bottom of the lake rendered the lake water incomparably gorgeous, and the scattered water reflected on Huaishi's face. He bent down and washed his face, and heard the crisp chirping of birds in the distance. An American stag raised its head vigilantly from the forest in the distance, glanced at Huaishi, then turned and ran away, crossing the raging river and gathering among the deer herd, returning to peace. The fiery red fox poked its head out from the green grass, looked at Huaishi, and after calling out twice, disappeared into the dense forest. In the fresh wind, it seemed like he could hear the sound of all things growing. Huaishi couldn't help but smile, and continued forward along the road, brushing past travelers. Looking at the map in his hand, he finally stopped outside a coffee shop. In this lazy afternoon, the soft sunlight turned the quiet coffee shop into a brilliant golden color. Behind the bar, the old store manager was smoking and chatting with a graceful female customer, and the clerk, who seemed to have seen him somewhere before, warmly greeted Huaishi to sit down and handed him the menu. "An Americano, thank you," Huaishi said after looking at the menu for a moment. "If it's Americano, would you like some croissants with it?" The young male clerk recommended. "It's fresh out of the oven, still hot." Huaishi thought for a moment and nodded. Just as the clerk turned around, he called out again, "Please wait a moment." The clerk turned back happily. "Is there anything else you need? Please, give me another cup of black tea." After thinking for a moment, Huaishi said, "The croissant can be served later. After being stuck for a long time, he inexplicably came to a realization, looked up, and said, "I'm waiting for a friend to come." The clerk's smile became more cheerful. That couldn't be better. Soon, a cup of coffee was placed on the table in front of him. Behind the bar, the clerk wiped the coffee pot in his hand and asked casually, "Is this the first time you've come to Yellowstone? You're so young, coming alone. How rare." "Because I've made an appointment with someone before." "In this dreamlike world," Huaishi calmly replied, "I've made an appointment with someone to travel to Yellowstone together." "A friend?" The clerk became curious. "With all due respect, is it a man or a woman?" "She's a very cute girl." Huaishi smiled and said what was in his heart without hiding anything. "I haven't seen her in a long time. She should have grown taller, right?" "Name?" The graceful female customer asked. "What's the child's name?" "Lily. Her name is Lily." Huaishi's mind was filled with memories, and he softly whispered, "She has another registered name, Gila. Although this name makes people feel afraid. Once you get familiar with it, you'll know that she's just afraid of others. That's not the real her." "Age?" The old store manager turned around and looked at the young man in front of him while smoking. "I think she should be about the same age as you." "That's hard to say." Huaishi sighed. "At the time, she told me that she was only 4 years old, but I feel that after so long, she must have grown up. However, I still feel that she should be slightly younger than me, like my little sister. She sounds like a gentle lady." The old man nodded and sighed. "Yes, she always seems to feel that she's not doing well, and she's always a little timid, but in reality, no one hates her," Huaishi said. "But I feel that she must be stronger than what I've seen. She's the kind of person with courage, and all she needs is a little encouragement and support." The graceful lady was silent for a long time before asking softly, "After not seeing her for so long, do you think she'll change? Maybe?" Huaishi thought for a while and said seriously, "She must be a little taller than before, and her hair may be a little longer. Maybe she'll be a little more mature. As long as she works hard, there's nothing that can stop her, right? Now she doesn't need to rely on anyone and can live well." "Don't you want her to rely on you?" the store manager asked curiously. "Don't you want her to stay by your side forever? Isn't that too cruel?" Huaishi shook his head. "In that case, am I still her friend? Even if she leaves me, she should be able to make a difference in this world. That's what a friend should look forward to, right?" "Yes, that's right." The store manager smiled with relief. "You're really my best friend, Huaishi. You flatter me." Huaishi waved his hand embarrassedly. "Speaking of which, what does she look like?" The curious clerk came up. "Is she beautiful?" "Of course." Huaishi nodded. "She used to be very beautiful, and now she must be even better than before. Have you decided what kind of clothes to wear? The clerk kept asking. I think a white dress is very nice. A sun hat and sunglasses can be matched. Friend, do you like high-heeled sandals? Do you want stockings? Black, white, nude? Is there a requirement for the length? In, pa. There was a sudden sound of collision under the counter. The clerk's face twitched, and her smile became difficult. She shrunk her neck and was pushed away by the store manager. Here's your tea. The store manager smiled and brought a tray with a teapot, teacups, and 2 snacks. Well, I wish you a pleasant journey, Mr. Huaishur. He took a step back and nodded with blessing. I also wish you and your friend to meet again. I won't disturb you anymore. After watching the graceful lady leave, the store manager turned around and walked into the kitchen. In the quiet shop, Huaishur was the only one left, quietly waiting. After a long time, he heard the crisp sound of the bell at the door. Someone pushed the door open and came in. Through the bright sunlight shining in through the afternoon window, Huaishur saw a familiar face. After such a long separation and journey, the expression in her eyes was as pure as the ocean as before. There seemed to be some changes, but there also seemed to be no changes. She was a little taller, and her hair was a little longer. Her demeanor was much more dignified and steady. She was as strong and courageous as Huaishur had imagined. Her face was beautiful, even more beautiful than before. After looking around, she finally noticed Huaishur. She was stunned for a moment. She took off the huge sun hat on her head and held it in her hand uneasily. She looked at his face and wanted to say something but stopped, until Huaishur smiled. Lily, he said softly, long time no see. Yes. The girl looked at the young man in front of her for a long time and nodded hard. She was so excited and happy in her heart. She had told herself many times to calm down, but for some reason, she suddenly wanted to cry. Under the afternoon sun, the girl, who had been separated for a long time, shed tears and smiled at her friend in front of her. Long time no see, Mr. Huaishur. This was their reunion after a long time. In this quiet and beautiful afternoon, they sat together and chatted with each other. They shared their experiences after parting, their frustrations and helplessness, their achievements and joy. They could truly feel each other's existence. It was so beautiful. As time gradually passed, in the midst of drowsiness, they leaned on each other and fell into a deep sleep. They were no longer afraid of parting and leaving. Instead, they smiled and welcomed the arrival of tomorrow. He succeeded. Outside the plenitude heavenly sphere, the 3 creators watched all this and offered applause and cheers for it. After 400 years, this miracle that Huaishur had personally salvaged from the past records, after a long period of guidance and nurturing, was finally given a physical form by Huaishur's description and returned to the human world. Through Huaishur's witness and the revision of the Book of Destiny, the true spirit of the elephant turned into a human. From then on, she no longer had any connection with the past. She no longer had to wander in the records and illusions of nothingness. Instead, like everyone else, she walked freely under the sky. She started a new life in the form of a human. This was the birth of life. Chapter 470. In the early morning, Huaishur woke up in the tent and heard the sound of boiling outside. He got up with sleepy eyes, opened the zipper of the tent, and saw the pot in the middle of the camp that was already boiling thick soup. The tent next to it had been half dismantled. Lily looked at the 2 tents in her hands that seemed to have been broken by her. She was puzzled. This should be the way to take it back, right? It's written in the manual. Huaishur couldn't help but sigh. You took the manual upside down. Oh. Lily was stunned at first. Then she suddenly realized. Then, she stiffened and looked back at Huaishur. She subconsciously hid the tent that she had dismantled behind her. You're awake? Yeah. I went to bed early last night. Huaishur rubbed his messy hair. Didn't we say we were going to see the waterfall today? I also said that it would be easier to prepare breakfast if I woke up earlier. You made soup? Yeah. Lily hurriedly rolled up her tent and tried to stuff it into her backpack, but no matter how hard she tried, it wouldn't fit. She could only tiptoe and stuff the rolled-up tent into the bushes. Everyone gave him face and pretended not to see it. Okay, at least the soup tasted good. There was also some ham and wild, edible mushrooms in it. Anyway, Huaisher couldn't recognize many of the wild vegetables, but the taste was much more delicious than expected. As a former genetic scholar, Lily had a medical background. It was impossible that she didn't know what was poisonous and what couldn't be eaten. Maybe this pot of wild vegetable soup had calculated how many nutrients and calories there were before it was cooked. He didn't have to worry about losing consciousness after eating it. After thinking about this, Huaisher couldn't help but think of Luo Xian. Was she okay now? Calculating the schedule, she should have arrived in America by now, right? The trip should still be going on. No matter what, Huaisher didn't have to worry about her safety. She was Elder Luo's daughter, an official disciple recognized by the founder, the heretic king. Instead of worrying about something happening to her, it was better to worry about some idiot who offended her and got turned into a steamed bun. Speaking of which, Americans don't eat buns, right? Huaisher asked inexplicably. Lily was stunned for a long time, not knowing what he was talking about. She was not an American, so how would she know about such things? But perhaps, it should be not eaten? But it seemed like there was a pie. But since Huaisher asked about steamed buns, it probably wasn't. He wasn't full? Was he hungry? Or was it because she didn't cook well and he wanted to eat something else in an instant? After going through countless complicated mental processes, Lily's expression became resolute. I'll go learn it right away. What? Huaisher was stunned. Lily took out her small spatula and began to think. The flour should be replaced by the starch-rich solanaceous plant. What do you like to eat for the filling? Is venison okay? No, that's not what I meant. I was just asking. Huaisher was so scared that he dropped the bowl. After a long talk, he finally dispelled Lily's idea of opening a kitchen on the spot. Lulu is so cute. Why eat it? But it really does look delicious. Huaisher rubbed his chin and looked around. There was no one around, and there were no surveillance cameras here. Even if he poached, no one would know. Should he catch a silly deer to eat at noon? After not breaking the law for a few days, his hand began to itch. While drinking soup, Lily suddenly asked, after seeing the waterfall, is there anywhere else you want to go? Well, Huaisher thought for a moment. The Grand Canyon? Lily shook her head. Didn't we already go there on the first day? The hot springs? We went there yesterday. The wildlife area? Huaisher suggested. Didn't you say 2 days ago that you wanted to see lions? We've already seen them all. Lily shook her head. After looking around for a long time, she suddenly felt a little disappointed. We've already seen them all. 1 week was enough for them to visit the entire Yellowstone Park. No matter how magnificent the scenery, how rare the wildlife, or how large the area was, there would come a time when they would see all of it. After they had seen the cataract today, there was no longer any reason for prolonging this brief excursion. After seeing this place, you're going to leave, right? Lily looked up and suddenly asked. Yes. In the silence, Huaisher finally nodded. Perhaps he could still stay in the Wanxiang heavenly sphere to accompany Lily to see the whole world, but how could there be a trip that would not end? There was still a lot of work waiting for him to complete, and a lot of things waiting for Lily to complete. No matter how happy a trip was, it would come to an end. Lily lowered her head dejectedly. After a long time, she asked softly, will we meet again? Anytime. Huaisher nodded matter-of-factly. Don't you have my family's contact information? Afraid that Lily would not remember, he took out a pen and paper from his pocket and quickly wrote, this is my home address, my phone number, WeChat, and Penguin number. If you're not in the present world, I still have the number of the Astronomy Society's express delivery beacon. He handed over the note in his hand and sincerely promised, no matter when, Lily, as long as you want to see me, you can contact me at any time. I will do the same. Lily carefully put away the note, as if she was afraid of losing it. She put it in the innermost pocket and kept it close to her body. Okay. She nodded vigorously and exchanged her contact information in the border darknet. As the student and future successor of the three wise men, there were still too many lessons for her to learn and understand. Before she could take charge of things on her own, the DM and the others would not let Lily wander around casually. Throughout the day, even if Lily received Huaishi's promise and tried hard to pretend to be happy, her expression could not help but become gloomy when she occasionally looked at the time. She was like a child who knew that her beautiful vacation was coming to an end. She was reluctant to part from the bottom of her heart. Until dusk gradually deepened, she still sat in front of the waterfall, unwilling to leave. Huaishir did not urge her, but sat quietly beside her. Until the sun set little by little, the stars filled the night sky, and the quiet moonlight shone on this beautiful world. She finally woke up from her dream and raised her head in a daze. "It's time to go," she whispered softly, slowly got up, and nodded to the young man beside her to thank him. "Thank you for remembering this insignificant agreement, Mr. Huaishir." She tried to smile and said softly, "There is nothing more beautiful than this trip. Just call me Huaishir." The young man waved his hand a little embarrassedly. "Mr. or something, it always feels a little strange. I'm used to calling you that. Even if I change it, I can't change it, right?" Lily shook her head helplessly and suddenly asked, "But no matter what, Mr. Huaishir, you will be my friend, right?" "Yes." Huaishir nodded. "That's great." Lily smiled and bent down. Something soft and cold touched Huaishir's forehead gently, and then she retracted her hand. Huaishir felt as if he was struck by lightning. Lily, on the other hand, had already quietly turned and left, disappearing into the night. In Huaishir's Book of Destiny, a new entry quietly appeared. "Blessings from the other side." Things seemed to be compatible. Reading the Book of Destiny increased by 30%. Learning speed of all skills increased by 20%. Anointed One, this is a precious gift from the Creator. Thou shalt not neglect it. At this moment, Huaishir did not have the time to look at this precious gift. His soul left his body. He was completely in a daze. Lily's last words before she left echoed like thunder in his ears. "Mr. Huaishir, I like you the most." "Nice." Lily had just opened her eyes when she heard KP's excited roar. Beautiful straight ball. Contestant Lily boldly launched an attack. Contestant Lily, A went up. Huaishir broke, Huaishir sank. Oh, what a beautiful story of youth. I'm so moved that I want to cry. Get lost. ST directly grabbed a pistol, aimed at KP, and pulled the trigger repeatedly. After emptying an entire magazine, she replaced it with another magazine and continued to shoot. Until this guy really turned into a pile of incombustible garbage. She kicked him away, quickly stepped forward, and supported the dazed Lily. "Are you okay, Lily?" She worriedly observed Lily's dazed look, fearing that the final transformation ritual would leave behind any defects or side effects. But Lily was still in a daze and did not speak. Only a trace of steam rose from her flushed face. After a long time, she finally recovered and looked at the woman in front of her in a daze. "Teacher ST, I. Before she could finish her words, she rolled her eyes and temporarily escaped from this world under unprecedented shame and panic. Only ST helplessly supported her, looking down at her who still wanted to escape from reality even in a dream, and could not help but sigh. To be able to do this is already the limit, right? Silly girl. This can't even be considered a confession. Wow, so bold? You've shocked me for a whole year. Under the Wanxiang heavenly ball, the hall was empty, but in front of the huge heavenly ball, there was a figure that seemed to be burning. It was as if she did not exist here, so ethereal. But her existence seemed to have turned into the axis of the whole world, giving people the illusion that everything would inevitably revolve around her. Children have nothing better to do than to fall in love. Go study hard. The usual lazy tone seemed to be faintly serious. No, silly boy is still young. He can't ponder about this every day. Where's my 9 years of college entrance exam, 5 years of mock papers? Aha, it's here. As she spoke, she stuffed a large stack of thick books into the receiver of the Wanxiang Heavenly Ball. Then, she still felt that it was not enough and stuffed a set of Lawn Gang exam questions 10 years into it. Then, she added a few advanced mathematics books. Chapter 471. Study hard for me. She gripped the joystick and said in a serious tone, "I'm doing this for your own good. After you finish these questions, you won't want to fall in love anymore. No, I have to check my phone too. I have to delete all the bad things that hinder my studies." The joystick was pulled down, but it stopped abruptly in mid-air. This was because her wrist was being held. Enough. Huaishur, who finally woke up from his long dream, raised his head, looked at her, and said word by word, "There's no need to do these things anymore." He seemed to be different from the past. At the same time, after experiencing thousands of reincarnations and torments, Huaishur, who had regained all his memories, had become completely different from the past. His eyes had changed. Even though they were as dark as before, there seemed to be a sharp edge brewing in them now. They became as firm as iron, dignified and cold, making it impossible to look straight at them. Then, he was quickly dumbfounded. He had just woken up from a dream, and everything in the dream quickly dissipated and left him, leaving only a vague impression and outline. It seemed like such a thing happened, but he couldn't explain it clearly. Instead, he felt a strong sense of confusion and bewilderment. Who am I? Where am I? What am I doing? Have I been tricked again? If it weren't for the fact that his memories of traveling with Lily were still so clear, Huaishur would almost suspect that something was wrong with him. "You're awake?" At some point in time, the figure in front of him had turned into a black flying bird. With an innocent expression, she quietly stuffed the phone that she had just taken out back into his pocket. She pretended that nothing had happened and smiled calmly. "Congratulations on passing the Utopia's trial." She flapped her wings vigorously and offered her blessings. "From now on, you're a member of the Utopia that everyone will recognize. Although you're an outsider, even those old farts in the modern realm won't treat you as an outsider." When she mentioned the trial, Huaishur took out the Book of Destiny as if he had just woken up from a dream and began to flip through it quickly. In just half a day, hundreds of pages of records appeared in the Book of Destiny. They were all records of his life in the virtual simulation. But what was unacceptable was that those records were simply too brief. Often, there were only 2 or 3 sentences, as if they were things left behind in his memory. All that was left was the general outline, and the specific details had been completely forgotten. "You forgot everything?" He slapped his knees in grief and indignation. "I've worked so hard to level up so many times. How could I have forgotten all about it?" First of all, the celestial sphere simulation is not an all-purpose learning machine. The main purpose is to let the trial taker see the direction of their life clearly. Otherwise, after one trial, wouldn't he become a completely different person? Being able to learn something from a fake simulation is already good enough. Crow shook his head helplessly. Secondly, there are some things that you can upgrade just by working hard. It depends on your talent, okay? Could be that you have never thought about how everything you do in there is going smoothly. How ridiculous is it that you have the right time, the right place, and the right people? There are some things that can't be improved just by working hard. Within the limitations of the myriad celestial sphere simulation, Huaishur's ability was simply like a cheat code, constantly improving without limit. How could he reach a level that he himself could achieve? If you ask me, you should be satisfied that I left you a little bit. Crow sighed. You still have to thank that little girl for giving you her blessings. Otherwise, don't even think about leaving this little bit behind. And Huaishur silently lowered his head, carefully looking at the title page of the Book of Destiny. Even if he had already prepared for it, he was still shocked by the progress of his skills at this moment. Even if they had rapidly shrunk after the simulation ended, the growth now was too frightening. The few skills that he used the most now all shot up like rockets. Alchemy, Metal Study, LV9. From the original level 4 to level 9 in an instant. It could be said that Huaishur had graduated in an instant. LV9 was only one step away from LV10. It could be said that most of the alchemists who did not choose to specialize could not compare to Huaishur's level. And the alchemists who chose the same specialization as Huaishur might rely on their own experience to barely surpass him. But Huaishur still had the sole ability of the imprisoning hand, as well as the assistance of the alchemy fire. With these 2 bonuses, he could already be regarded as the limit of LV10 for ordinary people. Cello performance LV17. He had risen 2 levels in an instant. After surpassing LV10, it could be said that he had entered the realm of true geniuses. To be able to go further, it could only be said that he needed a lot of luck and a lot of time to search and work hard. The further he went, the more difficult it was to go further. It was like the difference between heaven and earth. And to jump from LV15 to LV17 in an instant. Even if Huaisher knew that he had played the cello for dozens of lifetimes, it was still a little unbelievable. This was all because he had relied on his dripping water-piercing stone skill to forcefully burst his experience bar. After reaching this level, Huaisher estimated in his heart that if he did not count the group of old perverts in the Hell Music Association, then he could be regarded as one of the few Grandmaster-level characters in the present realm. Unfortunately, it was only purely in terms of skills. The classical music industry was not a place where cats and dogs with no background could mix in. Without qualifications, background, and the guidance of an orthodox master as an introducer, it was very difficult to make a living in the circle of aristocrats. If it was a pianist, there might be a place for him to make a name for himself, but for a cello, forget it. At most, he could just change to another accompaniment. Without you, the Huai musician, would they not play Bach? Today, Huaisher's attention to fame and fortune had gradually faded. But what made him even happier was that his skills had improved. There is nothing more wonderful than personally feeling one's own progress. And swordsmanship performance method, which was completely dependent on cello performance, also rose with the tide. As Huaisher's cello skill improved, it would naturally rise as well. LV15, unless he was a natural swordsman who had killed countless people, was proficient in hundreds of weapons, and practiced hard 4 days a year, a genius who could enter such a level after middle age. This was the real successor of the Orchard Gym. Although Huaisher was just a slacker who had only taken half a month of trial classes, after reaching such an achievement, when he introduced himself as Elder Luo's disciple in the future, he was not afraid of embarrassing Elder Luo. But the basic skills of drumming and use-step did not improve much. It was still the same. Hand-to-hand combat was still a shortcoming, and compared to that, it was even worse. But this was something to be considered in the future. Now, the most surprising discovery was illegal organization operation, LV12. What the hell? Huaisher was stunned. How did this skill improve so much? If you remember correctly, it seemed to be only at LV4 or LV5, at most at the level of a small criminal gang robbing a bank. But now at LV12, he was afraid that he could go to America to be a smuggler and a drug lord. He was simply a born criminal boss. If Huaisher worked hard, he could even start from scratch in Africa, Australia, or the Middle East and become a big boss in the underworld. But what the F***CK is going on with such an outrageous growth? Why don't you ask yourself? Crow pointed at his book of destiny and sighed. Even in a world without ascendants, you were able to build your own base between the two forces of Rome and the Russian Federation. In such a hellish place, you almost established a country. I knew you idiot was born to be a criminal. Do you want us to work harder? I didn't, don't talk nonsense. Huaisher was flustered when he saw it. Although, yes, the vague memory of working together with Senior Sister was indeed sentimental. But wasn't this all fake? In addition to these messy skills, even death premonition, a skill that hadn't been used for 10,000 years, seemed to have joined in the fun and become LV2. He died thousands of times, tens of thousands of times. But the improvement wasn't big. At most, the effect became a little stronger, and there was a small line of words behind it. Small clues reveal the whole picture. It was no longer completely passive, but could let Huaisher sometimes take the initiative to detect some details that could kill him. The ability to survive went one step further. And after such a long reincarnation, all the vague records in the Book of Destiny settled in one place, forming a new skill. False wisdom. There was no level, no room for growth and improvement. As for the explanation of the skill, it was even more ambiguous. Most of the time, you can make choices that aren't the worst. It looked strange, and in fact it was strange. It was subtly between useful and useless. If you were to cut the fuse of a bomb, In the middle of the red, blue, and green lines, he would probably have a little more chance of not cutting the choice that would kill him on the spot. It didn't affect the upper limit of luck, but slightly increased the lower limit. It was better than nothing. Regarding this, Huaishur had already accepted it. To be able to help Lily and obtain the birth of life, this trip was completely enough for him. Not to mention there were so many insights and growth along the way. But Huaishur lowered his head and looked at the blessing of affinity in the Book of Destiny, but he couldn't help but fall into silence. Recalling Lily's words when she said goodbye, his heart was in a mess, and he couldn't help but have a headache. He didn't know how to respond. Just as he was thinking and didn't know how to understand her words, he felt the phone in his pocket vibrate crazily. It wasn't the number in the phone book, but an unknown caller. But it was the same number that Lily had left for him. He was stunned on the spot. After a long time, he mustered up his courage and picked up the phone. Hello. Chapter 472. Hello. After a long silence, he said, This is Huaishur. For a long time, no one spoke, until Huaishur suspected that there was no signal from the astronomy club. A trembling voice came from the other side. Hello. I'm Hai. Ahem. I'm Lily. As if she had almost bitten her tongue, she coughed a few times and hurriedly explained, Just now. It was a misunderstanding. Huaishur was stunned for a long time and couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief. However, he didn't know why he began to feel disappointed. I know. He nodded slowly. Hearing his quick reply, Lily seemed to be even more anxious. Incoherently, she tried to defend herself. Actually, I don't like it that much. No, it's not that kind of like you think it is. No, I don't. I don't. The more she spoke, the lower her voice became. She was so anxious that she almost cried. I know. Huaishur comforted her. Don't worry. She's a friend. I just accidentally bumped into her. I wasn't careless. Lily suddenly raised her voice, interrupting him. But then, as if she was stuck, she quickly lowered her voice and became a vague whisper. In the end, she seemed to have given up. The phone was hung up. Huaishur was stunned and heard the sound of melon seeds falling to the ground. In just a few minutes, a large pile of melon seed shells had been piled up at Crow's feet. She skillfully cracked the melon seeds and watched this good show. Suddenly, she asked with a faint smile, Do you like her? After a long silence, Huaishur shook his head in frustration. I don't know. Shouldn't you know this kind of thing best? Crow asked. Or, do you think it's not good? But I didn't do those things for her to like me. Huaishur looked at her and asked matter-of-factly, When you do the right thing, you shouldn't expect such a reward, right? Although I'm very happy, I still feel that it's not right. In the end, was this fondness due to friendship, gratitude, or the experience of adventure? He didn't mind at all. He could accept everything and do whatever he wanted. It was so simple. She trusts you so much and relies on you so much that as long as you show her kindness, she will feel happy and happy. As long as he made a promise, she would believe him unconditionally. He was completely unprepared for all of this. And then, if he encountered the next one, would he continue to act irresponsibly? What was the difference between him and a scumbag? People have to be responsible for what they do. Huaishur raised his head and said seriously to Crow, I didn't work hard to become someone like my parents. Crow was stunned. After a long while, he couldn't help but chuckle softly. He didn't know if he was happy or relieved. Although you're still a scumbag, you've really grown up. She raised her wings in satisfaction and patted Huaishur's head. Hee. Huaishur, I really like you the most. Huaishur's expression suddenly became complicated. He was especially alert and vigilant. Hey, why is the treatment different? Crow became angry. Huaishur rolled his eyes. Hee. How can a pure and beautiful girl be the same as a black-hearted and evil force? TSK, what a pity. Crow shook his head regretfully and said meaningfully, I was going to give you some benefits, the kind that a pure and beautiful girl wouldn't give you. Huaishur sneered. He had long been used to her tricks. A pure and beautiful girl wouldn't give me that. Are you talking about cheating money? Of course, it's like that. A pair of white hands cupped his cheeks and forced him to raise his head, not allowing him to refuse. Unknowingly, A gentle breath was already close to him. There was a faint fragrance lingering at the tip of his nose. Huaishur stood rooted to the ground, staring blankly at her face as it inched closer and closer, bit by bit, but her mind went blank. He had never seen her face so closely before. It was as beautiful as the world, charming and dignified, as awe-inspiring as the sun. It was destined to shine on all things, not allowing anyone to refuse. Also not allowing him to refuse this gift that belonged to him. In a trance, the illusion suddenly dissipated. Huaishur woke up from his daze and felt a sudden pain on his lips. It seemed like he was poked by something. Yes, it was a slender and sharp beak. "Ah, sorry, I used up my transformation time," Crow said awkwardly. "Let's do it again next time, okay?" After a long, long time, Huaishur finally reacted. He lowered his head blankly and looked at the innocent little crow in front of him. He was played by this shameless woman again. He reached out without hesitation and fiercely grabbed her. Then, he pointed the gun at her face. He wished he could take a picture of the scene, just now, and put it in front of her. "Change for me. Don't be so fierce." Crow looked around and said, "Aren't we progressing too fast? According to common sense, we should have a sweet relationship first. Damn it, how dare you deceive the feelings of an innocent boy? Who would fall in love with a black-hearted woman like you?" Huaishur pulled the trigger. "Die for me." Bang! A high-pitched gunshot rang out. In the end, after the gun in Huaishur's hand exploded into a ball of ink, it condensed again on Huaishur's shoulder with a helpless expression. It raised its wings and patted his head, saying earnestly, "Sorry, Huaishur, the adult world is so cruel. See, if you don't seize the opportunity, this benefit is gone." After being messed around by her, Huaishur was so angry that she couldn't be bothered to talk to her about it anymore. Anyway, he couldn't win against her. But for the 1080th time, he made up his mind. Don't bully a poor boy. 30 years on the surface of the river. 30 years at the bottom of the river. I'll let her be proud for now. While I'm stronger than her, she'll know how wrong she was in the past. The effect of the spiritual victory was very strong, and he finally calmed down. In the end, it was just a tease. It wasn't the first time, so he didn't take it to heart. He just thought that this black-hearted woman's bad taste was acting up again, and he was being played by her. Under this kind of guidance, his originally depressed mood finally improved a lot. After packing up his things, he pushed open the door again and saw the blizzard outside. In the snow, next to the bonfire, a sled and a few bored sled dogs were still waiting patiently. When they saw him come out, they immediately barked. But this time, Huaishur couldn't understand what they were saying. Huaishur took a last deep look at the door behind him, closed the door again, and said goodbye to this place. After feeding the sled dogs, he rested for a while, put away the bonfire, and set off in the direction he came from. Crow landed on his shoulder, tilted its head, and looked at Huaishur's serious face, pretending to be angry and ignoring it, and suddenly asked, "Speaking of which, after experiencing so much in the new world, did you learn anything?" "A little." Huaishur thought for a while and said helplessly, "But it seems like I can't say it." "That's normal." Crow sighed. "Most of life is like this. You feel that you have learned something, but after a while, you will find that it is just your illusion. This world is bigger than anyone expected, and there are so many changes. Those who dare to say that they have figured it out are either near the end of their lives and have no strength to move forward. Either that, or they've given up on themselves and deceived themselves." "It doesn't matter if I don't understand it?" Huaishur asked. He originally thought that Crow wanted him to think about a result, but he didn't expect that she didn't care at all. "What's there to understand?" Crow looked at him seriously. "If you don't understand, then don't understand." "Huaishur, as long as you can continue to think, it's fine. The only thing I care about is your life now, and your life in the new world. Will it make you happy?" After a short silence, Huaishur faced the wind and snow and smiled. "Yes, I am very happy," he said. "Whether it is in reality or in all the branches in the new world, seeing other people's smiles makes me happy. Knowing that my existence can make them live better, I will be happy." "Haha, you are really incorrigible." Crow chuckled softly and said, Out of all the choices, is there any that you like? So many lives, so many directions. Why sure, which one will you choose? It's hard to say. Huaisher thought for a while and said honestly, I like most of them. You have to choose one, right? There's only one way for adults to choose, right? Huaisher raised her head without any shame and told her, What? I want them all. Crow was speechless. Oi, oi, where did you learn to make such an unreasonable choice? Ha, didn't you teach me this? Huaisher couldn't help but laugh out loud. Is this what it means to be caught in a trap of one's own making? Since you have sowed the seed, you should taste the bitter fruit you have sown. Once again, Crow felt that her life was not easy, but there was no other way. Moreover, since he was her contractor, she had to be responsible with such complicated feelings. She asked, You still have some time for your vacation? Is there anywhere you want to go? No. Huaisher shook his head. I've been out for so long, I miss home. All right. She nodded slightly and went back into Huaisher's collar, only revealing her small head. She looked at the dancing snow in the distance and said softly, Let's go home. Yes, let's go home. Huaisher nodded and shook the reins, making the bells ring even more intensely. Those lively and cheerful sled dogs ran forward excitedly, barking loudly, facing the storm that was gradually rising in the distance, and ran wildly. Galloping through the endless snowy plains, full of the harvest of the journey, they returned to the prosperous world. After a long time, Mathers finally woke up from his dizziness. He subconsciously touched his head. His head was still there. He then touched his back nervously and let out a sigh of relief. His waist was still there. In the cold wind that leaked in from outside the door, he raised his head with difficulty from the rope binding him, shivering from the cold. But when he saw the surrounding scene, he was stunned. Where's the Wanxiang Heavenly Ball? Where did my huge Wanxiang Heavenly Ball go? Looking around at the empty 13th test area, Mathers was stunned for a long time. He couldn't help but feel sad and couldn't help but roar at the sky. He deeply felt that the times had changed. You bunch of goddamn bastards. How dare you snatch something from the Golden Dawn? Chapter 473. Accompanied by the flying snow, the person who rushed down from the mountain pushed open the door and was swept into a bone-piercing cold wind from outside. A man wearing a thick and long-down jacket jumped a few times in front of the hot air from the air conditioner. He shivered before he breathed a sigh of relief. Seeing the person reading the newspaper in the gatehouse, he was stunned. Brother who? You're already here? I'm used to waking up early. The person reading the newspaper poured him a cup of hot tea. Lu Yin shivered, picked up the teacup, and asked, What's the date today? November 29th. The person reading the newspaper said, It's already so cold in November. Lu Yin sucked in a breath of cold air. You just arrived? The person reading the newspaper smiled. Yes, I was assigned here in autumn. You'll get used to it in the future. He said, Mount Diyu is not a good place for a vacation. It's hot in summer and cold in winter. Insects are everywhere in spring, and there's endless work in autumn. To be honest, before I came, I thought Mount Diyu was like spring all year round. Ah, that's just a lie. There are always people who know that this is a plantation in Dongxia and think that the scenery here is beautiful and the climate is pleasant. In fact, it's not the same thing. Yes, it's still like this, but it's different now. Why? Lu Yin asked. He looked up at the gray sky outside the window, as if he could see the framework set by the Creator. Can it be adjusted? Yes, it was deliberately adjusted like this. Hu Jing put away the newspaper and said, The old lady likes it. When it came to the old lady, Lu Yin had nothing to say. Hu asked her to be older and more powerful than anyone else. Even Xian Yao didn't dare to go against her. In front of her, everyone was a junior. Let me teach you a lesson. Hu Jing, who was in charge of guiding Lu Yin, smiled. The old lady is more extreme. Instead of pretending to be like spring all year round, it's better to show the harsh nature of the 4 seasons. The former environment can only grow weeds, but the real talent never cares about the lack of spring wind and rain. Do you understand? I understand. Lu Yin nodded. Even if you don't understand, you have to pretend to understand. If you don't understand, you have to remember. There will come a time when you understand. Hu Jing glanced at him, who was still in a daze, and picked up the newspaper again. Rest for a while. We'll be busy later. I asked you to come down from the shed, not to sit down and drink tea. What is it? Lu Yin asked, looking at the heavy snow outside. His face turned a little green. It can't be the same as 2 days ago, right? Welcome. Hu Jing said, originally, I didn't need you, but I see that you're quite free. Why don't you come and see the world with me? If you stop flirting online, Old Wang won't let you sweep the snow every few days. Amazing. Lu Yan's face turned green. It was unknown whether he was silently criticizing Lao Wang or complaining about his teacher. But there was nothing much to say. Which newbie didn't serve tea and water? In the future, when the newcomers came, he would do the same. Other than plucking weeds and planting flowers every day, this was the only entertainment left in the mountains. Rather than saying that this made him unhappy, it was better to say that it was a visitor that his master had mentioned. This is the third one this month? Lu Yin clicked his tongue. Why are there so many people recently? It's a last-minute addition. Can't the leaders empathize with the people working overtime? Lu Yin complained in a bad mood. He slumped on the sofa, completely devoid of energy. In any case, he had worked here for 3 to 4 months. He still didn't know what kind of people came to Mount Yudai. Other than workers like him who were in charge of maintenance, the people who came here were all sheep farmers. They were jealous of the precious materials that covered the mountains. It was fine if they took cards to eat, but if they couldn't eat, they had to carry them. Even if they couldn't touch the high-level abyss plants, they would ruthlessly hang the basic materials that Lu Yin and the rest were in charge of. Who asked Mount Tai to be so rich in earth energy? The calamity plants of the abyss grew here like chives. This month, Lu Yin was already annoyed by the 2 ugly fellows who ate in front of him. Regarding his complaints, Hu Jing didn't say anything. He only gave him a reminder. Later, be more respectful. It doesn't matter if it's official business. Don't throw a tantrum. They're from the astronomy club, the master said. They're guests that old madam invited. Lu Yin didn't care about the former, but the latter stunned him. Old madam had been living in seclusion all these years. He had been in Mount Yudai for so long, but he had only seen her once. Even now, when he thought of old madam's harsh gaze, he felt his legs go weak. A guest that old madam invited. Just thinking about it made him feel a little guilty. Sometimes, such important people were even more difficult to deal with than little ghosts. As long as the latter was dealt with properly, it wouldn't be a problem. Whether they were good or bad had nothing to do with him. However, serving such a high and mighty figure might not be beneficial. If he were to offend him, his future days would be a little difficult. According to young Master Chu, if he doesn't want to work at the astronomy club and comes to Dongsha, then he will immediately become old madam's personal student. Hu Jing wanted to say more, but 2 car lights suddenly lit up in the snow outside the gatehouse at the foot of the mountain. A car broke through the wind and snow without warning and arrived here. It didn't directly drive in. Instead, it stopped a distance away. The chauffeur got out of the car and opened the door to the back of the car. A young man, who was shivering from the cold, walked out. He was still wearing a thin layer of clothing. Lu Yin suspected that he was only wearing a t-shirt under his jacket. When he got out of the car, he didn't stand firm and even staggered. More importantly, he seemed to be even younger than himself. It's him. Lu Yin couldn't believe it. Yes, it's him. Hu Jing folded the newspaper and stood up. Don't talk later. Just stand to the side. Just bring your eyes and ears. Don't bring your mouth. Just watch the show. Lu Yin hurriedly stood up and followed him. When he opened the door, a violent snowstorm suddenly swept up. The hurricane outside seemed to be roaring. The loud sound kept rolling over and over, shaking one's soul. Who would have thought that Dongsha's largest abyssal botanical garden would be such a cruel and cold place? In any case, Huaisher wouldn't have thought of it. He was shivering now. He was freezing. But at the same time, he couldn't help but blush. His whole body was burning as if he was drunk. As soon as he walked in, the mountain ghost's sacred mark became more active than ever. Under the abundant earth chi and snow, countless plants surged. The entire mountain ghost's sacred mark seemed to be overloaded and fell into a drunken state. It was even more uncomfortable to be suppressed. The former was collective cold violence, while the latter was incomparably enthusiastic, pulling and dragging. A group of extremely enthusiastic ants crazily circled around him, curiously asking him how old he was this year, whether he was married, whether he had a partner, how much he was paid, where he worked, when he planned to buy a house, if he was too young to ask for a wife, if he was prepared to take a parking space. His head was swollen and his vision was blurry. The local gangs were too King enthusiastic. He had just returned from Antarctica 2 days ago. He couldn't stand it. His body couldn't take any nourishment. Mr. Huaisher, these two will take you in. The driver tried to hold the overturned black umbrella in the strong wind and shouted beside Huaisher, "I'll wait for you here." What? Huaisher looked over with a dumbfounded expression. The driver shouted again before he reacted. He saw a figure staggering over in the wind and snow in front of him, holding a hiking stick. He was covered in a down jacket and had a mask on his face. He held a document in his hand and compared it with the trembling teenager in front of him. He asked loudly, "Name?" "Huaisher, male, 17 years old." "But don't King do this for me." Huaisher was furious. "Why the CK? Is this everywhere I go? Hurry up and give me some clothes first, okay?" After the two confirmed Huaisher's identity, they didn't say anything and pulled him inside. They didn't even enter the gatehouse when they passed by. Huaisher looked at the air conditioning inside and was about to die of envy. "Can you let me drink some hot water?" Huaisher asked. "What?" Hu Jing turned around and shouted. "Hot water!" Huaisher roared in the roaring cold wind. "Hot water! Heater! It's freezing. It's available on the mountain." Hu Jing replied loudly, "There's no time for you to rest. The old lady wants to see you. She said that you should go up the mountain as soon as you arrive." After shouting 3 times, Huaisher finally heard clearly. He almost couldn't feel where his face was. It was too cold, but under the surrounding snow and ice, the vitality of the plants was extremely abundant. They crazily pulled at his stigmata, as if they wanted him to be immediately assimilated by the countless crazy vitality, take root immediately, and stay here forever. Huaisher was almost unable to maintain the stability of the ecosystem in his body, not to mention changing to a more cold-adapted ecosystem at this time. If he dared to do so, he was afraid that in the short moment when the ecosystem collapsed, he would immediately be assimilated here. Something was wrong. Completely wrong. A naturally formed ecology would not have such a terrifying assimilation, nor would it display such an abrupt and fanatical enthusiasm. Huaisher closed his eyes. Through the snow and ice, he could feel the mighty echoes in the depths of the earth veins, as well as the bell-like roaring rhythm from the top of the mountain. All the vitality was under the control of that invisible hand. Someone was deliberately targeting him. Huaisher's footsteps paused as she stared straight into the eyes of the two fellows, almost suspecting that she was being played. "Who's the old lady?" he asked. "I've never heard of her." The two guys suddenly looked as if they had seen a ghost. "You came to Mount Udai, but you don't know who the old lady is?" Hu Jing was also stunned. "Friend, do you have a problem with us?" If it were not for the old lady's approval, he would almost suspect that Huaisher was trying to make trouble. "You don't know the current Emperor Qing?" Hu Jing looked at him as if he had seen a ghost. He really couldn't figure out what kind of person this little brother of his was. But soon, the phone in his arms rang. He ran to a corner sheltered from the wind and squatted down to answer the call. Soon after the call was hung up, he ran back with a strange expression. Huaisher felt that he had frozen into a snowman beside the memorial arch at the foot of the mountain road. Anyway, there was no wind here, so he didn't have to shout to talk. He really couldn't figure out why the current Emperor Qing wanted to make things difficult for him without even meeting him. He thought, "I've never offended such a big shot, right?" But when he thought of this, he felt very guilty. He had offended too many people. Who knew if any of them were related to the Emperor Qing? Living under someone else's roof, no matter what brand of eye drops you were given, what size shoes you were given, how could you still refuse to wear them? But at least let him know why he died, right? Hu Jing came back with a complicated expression. He looked at Huaisher with a pitiful expression. "What's wrong?" Huaisher felt that something was wrong. Hu Jing coughed twice and repeated the words on the phone. The old lady said that Chu Hongchun used my things to do a favor for him. I don't agree. Huh? Huaishir was stunned. Why'd he change his mind again? But then, Hu Jing changed the topic. If you can reach the top of the mountain and see her face, you can take whatever you want. If you can't even see the old lady in person, please go back. Huaishir looked around and felt that the deeper he went, the more exuberant the vitality was. There was a terrifying ecological circle with incomparable assimilation power. He couldn't help but sigh. The old lady has a bad temper. That's right. The old lady is like this. She means what she says. Hu Jing shook his head and said, "Do you want to go back? I'll send you back." Huaishir thought carefully for a long time and suddenly answered, "I'll try." If the Emperor Qing had refused Huaishir's arrival before, Huaishir might not have continued to pester him. There were so many plantations. Although it was troublesome to go through the Astronomy Association, it was not impossible to find. But now that the old lady had set up a carriage in front of him, he was a little eager to have a try. Seeing his serious look, Hu Jing nodded as if he had expected it. He pointed to the back and said, "Then we'll go back first." Wait. He had just taken 2 steps when he heard Huaishir say, "Leave a down jacket for me first. Otherwise, I'll freeze to death here today." He was stunned for a moment. He looked at Huaishir and couldn't help but look at the newcomer next to him who might be too warm. He revealed a frightening smile. "Lu Yan, give your down jacket to the guest." Therefore, Lu Yan's face turned even more green. He knew that nothing good would come here today. According to the surveillance footage that Hu Jing and Lu Yan saw when they were drinking tea and enjoying the air conditioner in the gatehouse, Huaishir had been squatting under the memorial arch for 2 hours. Well, with the down jacket that he took from Lu Yan, he finally felt a little warmer. He didn't move forward or backward. It was as if he had made up his mind to stay here and not move. In fact, during these 2 hours, he had been trying to reorganize the vitality of the surrounding plants. However, the vitality of Mount Udai was simply too rich. It was like a ball of tangled hemp that had once entangled him here. It couldn't be cut or organized, especially when the vitality of the same kind in his body was responding to the outside world, trying to connect with it. For a moment, most of the vitality in his body seemed to have turned into a traitor. It couldn't be helped. This was the instinct of a mountain ghost. If he couldn't connect with the outside world, how could he adjust the ecology and absorb the earth energy? It could be said that this was a trap specially made for mountain ghosts. If it were other types of stigmata, there wouldn't be such trouble. However, for Huaishir, the closer he went to Mount Udai, the closer he was to a hopeless situation. Perhaps this was just a casual move by the Qing emperor, but left an insurmountable chasm in front of Huaishir. He had no choice but to take a step back. It's not that I don't want to give it to you, but if you can't even go up the mountain, you can't get it, right? He was more and more certain that he must have offended that old lady somehow. However, the problem now was how to solve the problem in front of him. Even when Huaishir was so cold that he couldn't feel his butt anymore, he still couldn't think of a solution. It was useless to think too much. He had to give it a try. Under all the observation, the young man who had been wandering in front of the mountain gate for a long time got up, jumped up, and did a set of broadcast gymnastics on the spot. After exercising his body, he took a deep breath. Suddenly, he turned around and asked, "Where's the toilet? I want to pee." Puffed. Hu Jing, who was in front of the screen, spat out a mouthful of tea. Lu Yan, who had been sprayed in the face as soon as he looked up, became more and more annoyed. "Why do you have to turn around and spray me?" "Ahem, the screen is also very expensive. Okay." Hu Jing looked away awkwardly. Soon, Huaishir, who had gone to the toilet, returned to his original position and took a deep breath again. Then, he took a step forward. He left a deep footprint in the snow. Then he took another step, a third step, and a fourth step. As the storm gradually stopped, there was the crisp sound of branches breaking under the snow all over the ground. After walking for 100 meters, Huaishir froze on the spot. The crackling sound was incessant. Huaishir could no longer take another step forward. On his exposed fingers, the circles in the fingerprints had become the texture of tree rings. It was exactly 17.5 circles. He couldn't go any further. The pressure from Mount Tai was too great. The ecosystem in his body couldn't take it anymore. If he took a few more steps forward, he was afraid that it would completely collapse, and then he would uncontrollably turn into a tree. Even if the Lotus Emperor was right above him and wouldn't let his condition deteriorate, he would at least lose his face. Brute force wouldn't work. There seemed to be an old voice reminding him in his ears. Huaisher sighed dejectedly. He took a step back, and then another. He took a step back, and then another step back. It was as if he was rowing against the current. He was quickly forced back to the foot of the mountain by the invisible pressure. He was sweating profusely in the cold wind, as if he had run a marathon. Huaisher sat down on the ground again. He looked at the mountain in front of him that was covered in white snow and the building that vaguely appeared at the top of the mountain. An insurmountable obstacle. Huaisher took a deep breath, sat down again, and began to think. Old lady, aren't you making things too difficult for him? At the top of the mountain, in the courtyard that was covered in snow, a lonely plum tree grew in a crooked manner. There were no flowers growing on its dark branches, only clusters of faint buds. The old lady in the corridor sat on a rocking chair, a blanket covering her knees. She was quietly staring at the door. Behind her, a woman passed by and served her hot tea. She placed it on a tray and said, "This is obviously to keep people 1,000 miles away, right? If the difficulty isn't set higher, how will we know if it's a good material or a piece of rotten wood?" The old lady patted the armrest of the rocking chair indifferently. "Didn't you climb all the way up when you were 13 years old? I took a whole month." The young lady laughed. She looked to be in her prime, and there was nothing special about her appearance. However, her fingernails were faintly pale green, as if she had applied nail polish. They looked exquisite and eye-catching, making people unable to take their eyes off them. "You used 29 days to go down the mountain to play and wander around. You were afraid that I would be angry, so you took half a day to go up the mountain. Aren't you embarrassed to say that?" "I just couldn't help but be lazy." The girl waved her hand awkwardly. "It's not as bad as you say, old lady. Both of you only know how to be lazy." The old lady rolled her eyes and reprimanded her sternly. "You're dawdling again. Have you finished your homework? You can't even pass the postgraduate entrance exam. What kind of ascender are you? This is no different from being an ascender, right? If you're a child, then go and study hard." Okay. The girl turned around awkwardly and was about to leave when she suddenly stopped in her tracks. She turned around in shock and looked in the direction of the door. He actually came up again? And interesting. The old lady narrowed her eyes and laughed softly. Huaisher took another step forward. This time, there was no crackling sound. Instead, the snow under his feet flipped over. Without any warning, a clump of lush green grass grew out. The plantain, which didn't have any special characteristics or rarity, suddenly appeared beside Huaisher. Huaisher was silent for a moment. Then, he raised his eyebrows happily. He had found a solution, even if it wasn't the most serious solution. He took another step forward. With another step, the snow flipped over again. Another petunia grew out from beside Huaisher's feet. Huaisher whistled. His confidence swelled. This time, he walked forward confidently. With every step, a clump of wildflowers and weeds grew out from under his feet. A path of flowers. It looked exceptionally beautiful. However, Huaisher's origin form fluctuations began to weaken slowly. The mountain ghost sage mark was rapidly weakening. In fact, it was more accurate to say that he had intentionally cut it off. To Huaisher, there were two problems with climbing the mountain. The first was that Mount Yudai's ecosystem had shown a terrifying assimilation ability under the Azure Emperor's control. The second was the large amount of vitality in his body that was constantly resonating with it. In particular, Huaisher's capacity was tens of times greater than a normal mountain ghost's. This external gravitational force had a frightening effect on him. The larger his body, the stronger the gravitational force of Mount Yudai's earth and chi. Normally, Huaisher would need to spend at least a week trying to reach a balance between the ecosystem in his body and the ecosystem in the outside world. Only then would he be able to assimilate into the local environment and become a part of it that they wouldn't be able to interfere with. He had to come up with a solution that would satisfy the Azure Emperor. But to Huaishur, there was obviously another solution. Why not take the initiative to reduce his burden? At this moment, as Huaishur stepped forward, numerous flowers and plants grew out from under his feet, extending upwards in a straight line. Compared to the first time, Huaishur's speed was extremely slow. It was as if he was walking with a heavy burden, but every step he took was steady and firm. It was as if he was hammering a nail into the mountain path. The ecosystem in his body was forcibly entering Mount Udai's great circulation. There was a clear distinction between them. Even if it looked watertight, if one squeezed hard, there would always be space. Every time he couldn't take it anymore, Huaishur would take the initiative to cut off part of the vitality in his body, allowing it to leave his body and be assimilated by Mount Udai's earth and chi. In any case, he had casually plucked countless flowers and plants. But to this extent, he couldn't even be considered abandoning the rook to save the king. Huaishur walked forward step by step, feeling happy. Every step he took made him even happier, especially when he had an idea. He turned the vitality of the plants that he had voluntarily given up into a probing rod, using it to pry into the great circulation of Mount Udai's great circulation. After stealing the chicken under the Azure Emperor's nose, he still felt that it wasn't enough. A certain daring lackey of the Astronomy Society began to steal it openly. 6,000 words combined into one. I'm a little stuck. I'll try to complete the advancement this week. Also, I'll get double the monthly votes. I beg for monthly votes. Chapter 474. Little brats these days, they're too daring. After a brief moment of shock, the old woman on the recliner narrowed her eyes. She wasn't angry because a certain shameless brat was secretly learning from her. Instead, she raised her finger and knocked on the armrest unhappily, as if she had seen a student flipping through their notes during an exam. If you want to learn, you should learn well. Huaishur heard a loud boom. Under the layers of snow, a loud boom came from the huge circulation of Mount Udai. It sounded like the sound of a bell, and the tides surged. In an instant, countless plants withered and grew. As the earth veins changed, the huge network of vitality suddenly changed. The originally turbulent undercurrent turned into a stormy sea. Huaishur's body suddenly shrank by tens of centimeters. His feet were almost sunk into the soil under the snow by the invisible pressure. Without hiding her actions, the Lotus Empress moved her finger, and the suppression of the entire Mount Udai turned from the dark to the light. The pressure increased several times out of nowhere. Udai Mountain was now covered in snow, and countless plants were growing. As the chi of the earth rose, the life force under the snow silently flowed and gathered in one place, forming an invisible and majestic city pass. It was imposing and imposing. It was like an old woman giving a severe blow to the younger generation. You can steal chickens or dogs as you wish. It doesn't matter if you secretly learn or learn from others. There's no need to deceive yourself. As long as you can come up, you can use any means. Putting aside the pressure that came out of nowhere, the Qing Emperor's magnanimity and boldness made Huaishur feel slightly ashamed. It was like a child's trick being exposed by an old woman. It was really embarrassing. But since she allowed him to learn as he pleased, under the pressure of the towering mountain, Huaishur's eyes couldn't help but light up. The huge Mount Udai included hundreds of thousands of abyssal plants from the entire present realm and the abyss. Thousands of different ecosystems had hundreds of different combinations and changes. In the end, the monarch, minister, assistant, and envoy formed a huge cycle without any loopholes or flaws. Even if it wasn't deliberately hostile, just its existence here made it difficult for Huaishur to move around due to the isolation and assimilation of its system. But what did it matter? It was just a little uncomfortable. Compared to the huge system in front of him now, it was not even worth mentioning. The pressure brought about by the change from the dark to the light was not small, but after no longer hiding, the operating mechanism was completely open to Huaishur, an outsider, for him to use as a reference. If Emperor Qing had even the slightest bit of dissatisfaction and hostility towards Huaishur, he would not have been so lenient. "Thank you for your kindness, old madam." Huaishur raised his head and shouted towards the mountain. The vast snowy mountain swallowed up Huaishur's voice. He didn't know if his gratitude had been conveyed, but after a long time, there was still no reply. It was obvious that the old lady was too lazy to bother with him. The test questions, the theory, and the derivation process are all in your hands. You're so embarrassing that if you don't even know how to copy, you'd better hurry up and go home. The young girl beside the rocking chair looked over. The old lady isn't angry? Am I not angry? The old man on the rocking chair snorted coldly. I have to let the little brats suffer a little. The girl laughed. But you've given me quite a lot of benefits, haven't you? What else? Are you going to expel him from Mount Tai? Emperor Qing asked. If the person who came today was a hooligan in his 30s or 40s, I would just beat him up. But I'm a 200-year-old old lady. Do you think I'm going to be angry with a 17-year-old child? If I really liked to get angry, I would have hung you up and beaten you to death long ago, so that you don't annoy me all day long. The old lady is stubborn but soft-hearted. The girl laughed and tucked the blanket on the old lady's legs. I'm going to prepare lunch. Does the old lady want to eat porridge? What porridge? Your old lady wants to eat meat. The old lady on the rocking chair glared at her. After seeing the girl laughing and walking away, she retracted her gaze and closed her eyes. She rocked back and forth on the rocking chair as if she was asleep. Beside her, the withered plum blossoms in the courtyard quietly welcomed the snow falling from the sky. Strands of tender shoots glowed with a hint of novelty. They were waiting for the coldest time of winter to arrive. By the time Huaishur reached the halfway point of the mountain, it was already afternoon. In any case, it was impossible to tell the color of the sky. It was always gray. The fact that he had made it this far meant that he had pretty much stolen all of the chickens. Almost all of the origin substances that could be discarded or simplified had been destroyed by him. All that was left was the rare life force that he had collected from the various infernal realms. The mountain ghost sacred mark had shrunk by half, reaching its lowest level in history. However, Huaishur's expression didn't become dispirited. Instead, he became more and more excited and happy. The more he wanted to climb, the more he could sense and experience. The more he realized that he had made a mistake, the more mistakes he had made. Perhaps others would have thought that this was something that they could only wish for, but if they were obsessed with the details, they would overlook the bigger picture. Along the way, there were many plants with contradictory natures on Mount Udai, and quite a few of them had natural enemies. But now, they were able to find a place in such a huge cycle. Although there was no conflict between them, they all belonged to the same main axis. They seemed to be inextricably linked and difficult to organize, but in reality, if one looked at the whole picture, they were clearly organized and orderly. Under this layout that encompassed all things were orderly, circulating without slacking off, and operating as usual. Even though it changed unpredictably, its essence remained the same from beginning to end, with a clear primary and secondary. Even though it didn't feel overbearing, Huaishur admired its boldness of being prepared for everything. After understanding this point, Huaishur's speed of climbing up the mountain became much faster. Through constant adjustments and changes to the ecosystem in his body, Huaishur's progress was unbelievably fast in just an hour. The mountain ghost sacred mark in his body had undergone a qualitative change, as if it had been reborn. He climbed step by step. In just 2 hours, the originally unapproachable mountain peak, which was like a mirage, was already within reach. He was only 1 step away. However, Huaishur was frozen in place. He felt that something wasn't quite right. He was only 1 step away. He could almost see the old man taking a nap in the hallway in the courtyard. She only existed there, but it gave Huaishur a terrifying pressure, as if the entire Mount Udai was surrounding her. At that moment, Huaishur suddenly realized something. He took a step back, and then another. Even though it was easy for him to take this step, he couldn't help but stagger back. It was difficult for him to take the last step. He had walked into the wrong place again. Wrong, very wrong. Even though they were both mountain ghosts, they were different. The Azure Emperor was the Lord of Life in the infinite worlds. He was the ruler of life and death, and he had the solemn aura of an overlord. However, when he was immersed in it, he forgot that he was not walking the path of the Azure Emperor. His mountain ghost wasn't aiming for the path of Fusong, Gomong, and the Qing Emperor. It was the path of Heaven's Inquisition. It wasn't a problem to have a monarch and his subordinates. However, only the Qing Emperor himself could unleash the greatest power of this path. The closer he was to this path, the further he would be from the path of Heaven's Inquisition. Unknowingly, Huaishir was bewitched by the immense pressure of Mount Yudai. He almost turned and joined the Eastern Xiao lineage under the old lady's guidance. But how could he have any complaints? He had given you so many benefits, and even showed you the entire great circulation of Mount Tai. Yet, you couldn't control yourself and walked on the path of the Azure Emperor. How could you blame him for that? Huaishir retreated step by step until he was back at the foot of the mountain. He couldn't help but wipe off his cold sweat. He finally felt a strong sense of respect for this old-school, fifth-level master. He didn't dare to face her with a frivolous attitude anymore. One had to know that thunder and rain were the grace of the monarch. The old lady's overt schemes and overbearing nature were truly powerful. If it weren't for the fact that Huaishir was used to courting death and wasn't used to simple difficulties, he would have become the old Bodhisattva's servant today. Huaishir panted for a moment and rested for a while. He wiped off the sweat that was about to freeze on his forehead. He didn't leave in a hurry. Instead, he went up the mountain again. He was challenging the challenge set by the current Qing Emperor. In the courtyard, the old lady who was taking an afternoon nap looked up thoughtfully. She knocked on the armrest of the rocking chair and sighed regretfully. Then, she ignored him. Indeed, Huaishir didn't know how to appreciate favors. However, how could she not be more lenient towards such a talent who wasn't afraid of the harsh weather? Such a beautiful piece of jade. No matter where she was, she should be praised and supported. Let him be. Let him be. Half regretful and half helpless, the old lady shook her head and sighed softly. Then, she lowered her eyes. Huaishir stepped onto the mountain again. This time, the mountain ghost's sacred mark changed again. After retracting all his sharpness, he actually allowed the great circulation of Mount Yudai to assimilate him. However, within the great circulation of Mount Yudai, the countless life forces in the ecosystem actively responded to the outside world. Along the way, he picked up the flowers and plants that he had abandoned. He also took the initiative to plant some things that he didn't need or could use here. He didn't plunder or invade. Instead, he coordinated and communicated. As a communicator, he calmly faced the pull of the countless surging life forces in Mount Yudai. He allowed his relatives to chat and pester him passionately while he answered calmly. He took the initiative to integrate himself into the great circulation of Mount Yudai. With the previous two experiences, it was easier to try again. At first, it was a little difficult. However, in the end, Huaishir's steps became lighter and his movements were faster. He walked with ease amidst the layers of pressure. It was as if he had finally integrated himself into the local outsider. Even if there was still some estrangement, it wouldn't be too difficult for him anymore. Just like that, it was like he was strolling. After 3 attempts, Huaishir finally reached the peak of Mount Yudai and walked into the courtyard. However, he saw an empty reclining chair. There was no one here anymore. Huaishir was stunned. He raised his head and saw the stars in the sky as the dark clouds dispersed. It was already late at night. He suddenly smiled. After wasting an entire day, how could he be so shameless as to make the old lady wait for him without sleeping? It was only natural that she would throw a tantrum if he didn't take the easy way out. Thinking of this, he shook his head helplessly. He didn't call out loudly. He walked to the side of the reclining chair and lay down. He pulled up the blanket on the chair and closed his eyes just like that. Not long after, he started to snore softly. After an entire day of arduous trekking, he was indeed tired. In the silence, at the end of the corridor, only the little girl who had stayed up all night to wait until now stared blankly at the uninvited guest lying on the old lady's favorite rocking chair, She wanted to say something, but stopped. Big brother, are you here to court death? Chapter 475. The next day, when it was close to noon, Huaishir opened her eyes. He saw the Qing Emperor's indifferent face. She stood in front of Huaishir and looked down at him. The current Qing Emperor looked very old, and her face was full of wrinkles. But what surprised Huaishir was that her gray hair was so short, and each strand was as sharp as a needle. There was no warmth or grace in her. When he lowered his pitch-black eyes to look at him, his deep eyes were filled with great majesty and solemnity. It made people tremble with fear. So, looking at the kid who occupied her reclining chair, she suddenly sneered. "Aren't you afraid that I'll be angry? Kid," she asked, "this is Mount Udai. You refused a toast only to be forced to drink a forfeit. You even offended me like this. Even if it's the Astronomy Society, you shouldn't be so arrogant, right?" Huaishir was stunned for a moment, and then shook his head. "If you're really angry, why did you wait until I had a good sleep before waking me up? Besides, didn't you leave a blanket for me?" The old lady raised her eyebrows slightly and said non-committally, "It does sound like what the old man of the Yuan family said. You're really bold. Are the people of the Astronomy Society so advanced now?" "I'm not here because I'm a member of the Astronomy Society." Huaishir got up, folded the blanket carefully, and put it back on the rocking chair. He answered respectfully to the old lady, "It's because Mr. Chu thinks that I'm a friend of the Social Security Bureau." "Chu Hongshan's friend? They're all little bastards." The old lady waved her hand indifferently, motioning him to move aside. She picked up the blanket and threw it to the little girl who was watching quietly. Then she sat back on the rocking chair, obviously not intending to argue with him. She just asked, "What do you think?" Huaishir thought for a moment and answered seriously, "It's really good here." It was more than good. For any planting stigmata, it was like heaven. If Huaishir planned to follow the path of the Qing Emperor and stay here, it wouldn't take many years for him to reach the maximum level. "Do you want to stay?" The old lady suddenly said, "I'll teach you." "There's no need." Huaishir shook his head again. "Astronomy is good." "Ah, you don't know what's good for you." The old lady snorted and didn't try to persuade him to stay. She just said in a businesslike manner, "Don't worry, I'm already so old. I won't use my seniority to make things difficult for you. Since you're here, I won't make things difficult for you. Besides, Chu Hongchun is the same as his father. They're both stingy. No matter how much life Force the Mountain Ghosts have, what's the point of being stingy?" She paused and looked up at Huaishir. "How much can you eat?" Huaishir thought for a moment and answered seriously, "This time, I plan to eat as much as I can." "All right, Zhu Shuang." She raised her voice slightly and called the girl who was watching from afar. "Since the guest is here, let's show him around. Let him take whatever he wants to eat." Zhu Shuang nodded and looked at Huaishir curiously. She gestured for him to follow her. After they left, the old lady lay on the chair and quietly basked in the rare sunlight in winter with a withered plum beside her. "I'm old after all." In the silence, the old lady listened to the footsteps and couldn't help but chuckle. Finally, a trace of warmth and kindness appeared in her cold and serious face. "It's good to be young." From that day on, there were no peaceful days in Mount Udai. It lasted until a week later. In the midst of the explosion of Earth Qi, Lu Yin, who was hard at work shoveling snow, wiped the sweat off his face. He looked up at the countless changes on the top of the mountain and couldn't help but sigh. "Why isn't it over yet? It's none of your business. Just shovel the snow." In the gatehouse, Hu Jing crossed his legs and happily drank hot tea while reading a newspaper. He read a cup of tea, a cigarette, and a newspaper for a day. There were also newcomers to bully. There was nothing to say about these days. Before he could finish reading the front page of tomorrow's news, he felt the entire roof tremble. He was stunned for a moment. He closed the newspaper and looked out the window as he yelled, "Lu Yin, what are you doing?" "It's not me," Lu Yin angrily replied. "Look for yourself." Lu Yin didn't need to say anything. Hu Jing had already seen it. A streak of jade-green light shot into the sky from the top of Mount Udai, constantly changing its shape. This was a miracle created by the interweaving of countless life forms. After a long period of preparation, a qualitative change had finally occurred. Someone had advanced. Who was it? Hu Jing thought to himself in disbelief. Suddenly, he thought of the figure that had climbed up Mount Yudai a week ago. It was him. It couldn't be, right? How could he have advanced so quickly? At the top of the mountain, Zhu Shuang stared at Huaishur with a numb expression. Again, as the green light surged, violent origin substance fluctuations surged from Huaishur's body and spread in all directions, forming a massive storm. Countless green sprouts began to grow out of the snowy ground. The entire Mount Yudai seemed to be responding to Huaishur's surging life force, sending countless strands of light into Huaishur's body in an attempt to lend him a helping hand. But the problem was, this wasn't the first time this guy had shown signs of advancing in the past few days. Over the past few days, Huaishur had been feasting on everything that came his way. He had practically devoured all of the treasures in Mount Yudai, as well as all of the laboratories and secret stashes. Logically speaking, he should have hung himself a long time ago and stepped onto the path of the Azure Emperor. The problem was, however, that every time he was about to advance, he would restrain himself. At this moment, Huaishur took a deep breath. That straight ray of dim light suddenly stopped. Then, inch by inch, it began to shrink back. It was as if it was extremely unwilling, but it was being forcefully pulled back into Huaishur's body and locked in place by the Sacred Mountain Ghost Mark. I can't advance. I can't just advance like this. If I make a mistake, I'll really become a traitor of the celestial genealogy and betray the sect. Huaishur's face turned dark green. His entire body seemed to have become rounder. After holding it in for a long time, he couldn't help but burp. He smiled at Zhu Shuang. I'm done. I'm not done. Zhu Shuang glared at him in frustration. She had accompanied this guy for a week. She was about to take the postgraduate entrance exam and had even delayed her revision. Why hadn't this guy advanced yet? Huaishur seemed to have eaten too much. He held his stomach in place. After a long time, he finally heaved a sigh of relief. Okay, here's enough. He wiped his mouth reluctantly. He had really reached his limit. He couldn't eat anymore. If he ate anymore, he wouldn't be able to hold it in and would advance on the spot. If it wasn't for the birth of life, how could he eat so much? The birth of life was essentially the gradual control of one's own state through the comprehension of life. Just like how there were big and small comprehensions, it allowed an android creator who didn't originally exist in this world to completely become a member of the present world. The huge comprehension brought about by this correction value was incomparable to giving birth to a child. Of course, there was the approval of the White Crown King and the assistance of the three wise men. However, the absolute leading role was Huaishur himself. Therefore, the effect brought about by this comprehension was exceptionally huge. Today, Huaishur's control of the vitality in his body and his own state had reached a perfect level. His control of the heartbeat, the operation of his lungs, and the texture of his skin were only the outermost manifestations. His absolute control of the stigmata and the soul was already close to the theoretical limit. It was because of this that he could eat so much on Mount Yudai. He ate until Zhu Shuang started to doubt life. Now, as Huaishur opened his palm, Zhu Shuang watched in disbelief. Countless vitality quietly emerged and intertwined, outlining the vague outline of the great circulation of Mount Yudai. It formed a scaled-down model of Mount Yudai that was tens of thousands of times smaller. In other words, Huaishur had been eating here and there these days. He had actually gathered the conditions to form the entire great circulation of Mount Yudai. But then, the projection in Huaishur's hand suddenly dissipated. Like the spring wind and rain, it quietly entered the overall great circulation of Mount Yudai again. Zhu Shuang started to doubt life again. This performance was truly shocking. At this level, as long as the Lotus Emperor nodded, he could immediately interfere with the entire great circulation. In other words, he had created an administrator's authority out of thin air. Old madam, if this bastard doesn't leave now, not to mention the chickens and dogs, Our house will be stolen. Sensing the hidden horror in Zhu Shuang's eyes, Huaishi's psychological need to pretend to be ignorant was once again satisfied. He was about to say something when his vision suddenly blurred. He appeared at the foot of the mountain. Old Madam was chasing him away. Since you're full, get out of here quickly. Thank you for your hospitality. I'm leaving. Huaishi held back his laughter and waved goodbye. Then, he turned around and tripped over a tree root. He fell hard, and his entire face slammed into the frozen ground. Smack! Huaishi awkwardly got up and rubbed his face helplessly. He smiled bitterly and put his palms together to beg for mercy. Then, he hurriedly left. This old madam's temper is really bad. He walked directly to the border transit station of the Social Security Bureau. It was afternoon when he returned to the Stone Marrow Hall. As soon as Huaishi entered, he saw Crow lying lazily on the sofa, basking in the sun. It was not rare for this woman to be lazy. What was rare was that she actually transformed into a human again. Her posture was charming and languid. It was hard to take one's eyes off her. What's wrong with you? Huaishi was shocked. He became alert again. Are you thinking of giving out benefits again? His mouth hurt when he thought of the benefits he received last time. This woman's conscience was really bad. He had to be on guard. But then he saw the 2 iron boxes on the coffee table that Crow stood on tiptoe. He suddenly understood. Is the thing here? The first box was opened. Inside the glass bottle was a piece of amber about the size of a fist. There was a pale flame burning quietly inside. Sensing Huaishi's gaze, the flame moved towards him. If it were not for the bottle, Huaishi even suspected that the flame would follow his line of sight and burn him. As for the second chest, it was filled with a bloody light that made Huaishi shudder. In the middle of layers of silver ropes, a palm-sized, blood-colored crystal flowed with rich scarlet. Just by looking at it, one could feel the monstrous waves of blood surging toward them. Huaishi felt suffocated. Then, Crow took out 2 more boxes. One box contained the divine light of grace. As for the other box, it contained the remains of the evil creature. The 4 materials were ready, and the birth of life, the truth of nothingness, the link of souls, and yesterday's illusion. The 4 conditions were completely prepared. Huaishi's mountain ghost's holy mark had also grown to its limit. With a crisp knock on the door, the express delivery from the Stoneware Association arrived in front of Huaishi's door. It was a reward from the Asian Rookie competition. In a huge box, all the materials needed to advance to Young Arbiter of Life were neatly arranged. All the materials were processed with the highest standards, and more than 2 portions were prepared. When Huaishi walked into the basement, he saw a solemn scene that was completely different from the past. Countless complicated alchemy runes were shrouded in a secret device. As Feng Shu closed the door behind Huaishi in the silence, Crow behind the secret device looked back and revealed a strange smile that made him uneasy. What are you waiting for? Huaishi, take off your clothes. She happily rubbed her hands and said expectantly, before you advance, let me see if your development is normal. Chapter 476. The Darkest Day. Huaishi didn't need someone to appraise him. He was certain that his development was normal. Moreover, Huaishi's attainments in alchemy had already surpassed the level of a novice. This kind of nonsense of he must be completely naked for an important ceremony could not fool him. Indeed, too much clothing would interfere with the secret device. However, if it was only a layer of linen, the interference would be negligible. After taking a shower, Huaishi changed into shorts and walked out. He did not give Crow any chance to use the phone in her hand. Otherwise, who knew how much money she would extort from him? It was impossible. Crow was not angry. After throwing away the phone, she carefully observed Huaishi. Layers of dark green capillaries had already protruded from under his pale skin. At first glance, they looked like strange tattoos. The layers of complex root-like mountain ghost sacred marks were constantly changing, pulsing together with Huaishi's heartbeat. From the crack in his chest, it spread out and covered his whole body. It then overlapped on Huaishi's back, forming a vague outline of Mount Yudai. However, this silhouette was constantly changing. Only after the faint light had circulated for a full cycle would its appearance appear for a short period of time. Good. I was worried that you would take a wrong path. Crow stretched out her hand and poked the sacred marks on Huaishi's back. She nodded with satisfaction. For the path of heaven's inquisition, the Ean's soul is the foundation, laying the foundation of life from death. But Mountain Ghost is an extension, like a messenger that communicates the inside and outside. In alchemy, it rises from the ground and descends from the sky. The first half of the sentence can summarize the role of Mountain Ghost. Born from death, reproducing from the ground, is the bridge between life and death, the pillar that maintains the balance. Being able to do this is already enough. Anything else is just icing on the cake. If you're confused by the amount of power, the loss will outweigh the gain. After saying that, she raised her hand and unceremoniously slapped Huaishi's back. A slap sounded. It almost left a red mark. Lie down obediently. She pressed down on Huaishi's shoulder. She didn't use much strength, but Huaishi's vision blurred, and he found himself lying on the ground. He saw the ceiling above him and Crow's eyes looking down at him. He was stunned for a moment. So fast. Yes. She smiled and nodded. So soon? Why are you in such a hurry? Huaishi was puzzled. He had just returned home and didn't even have time to catch his breath before Crow brought him to the basement. He couldn't understand why they were in such a hurry. As the saying goes, it's better to be on time than to be early. You've come at the right time. Crow smiled and waved his hand. He bent down and pulled out the sacrificial knife from Huaishi's stigmata. He pressed down on Huaishi's hands and feet and cut them open one by one. Immediately, faint green blood flowed out from Huaishi's outstretched hands and feet. It spread along the complicated array below him and gradually covered the entire secret apparatus. He didn't feel weak at all. Instead, he felt like he had high blood pressure. After letting out some blood, Huaishi felt much lighter. Previously, he had eaten too much Mount Tai and had indigestion. Now that he had released the excessive vitality, the Mountain Ghost stigmata was able to operate smoothly. Furthermore, using Huaishi's blood as a base material was much better than using anything else. At the very least, it was compatible with the stigmata. Crow's movements didn't stop. He quickly mixed the origin substance solution into the array that he had carved out beforehand. When the vitality in the blood was stimulated by the origin substance, it began to glow with a hazy light. As the saying goes, once an opportunity is lost, it won't come again. Crow took out a pocket watch out of thin air and checked the time on it. In his other hand, he took out the blood-hatred crystal, divine light of grace, evil remains, undying flames, and other materials, and embedded them around the secret apparatus. A faint heat and pain followed the blood on the ground and drilled into Huaishi's body from his wounds that had not yet healed. His body suddenly stiffened. It was as if he had been thrown into an alchemy cauldron in an instant. The Mountain Ghost stigmata began to operate violently, resisting this sudden change. However, it was futile. Instead, it was guided by the secret apparatus and began to undergo changes that Huaishi could not predict. Intense lignification began again. It spread from his hands and feet to the inside. Layers of fine aerial roots grew out of Huaishi's pores, completely merging him with the entire secret apparatus. Crow's movements were too fast. Huaishi had no time to react. He couldn't help but gasp under the stimulation of intense pain. I say, can't you prepare me mentally first? That's true. Crow nodded. I had written down the precautions before, but I forgot to give it to you. With that, she stretched out her hand, fished out a thick book, and threw it to Huaishi. But Huaishi did not have the hands to catch it. The cover of the book directly covered Huaishi's face. There was a snap. What is this? Huaishi felt the pain. He narrowed his eyes blankly and read the title of the book on the cover. 3 Years of Broken Chapters. 5 years of abuse? Sorry, I took the wrong one. Crow replied without the slightest bit of shame. That should be it. In a place where Huaishi could not see, she directly pulled out the sword of virtue from Huaishi's bag. She raised it and lightly cut her wrist. In an instant, a trace of sparkling blood adhered to the blade. In an instant, a blazing flame rose into the air and burned the entire blade red. The blade wailed, bursting with the sound of steel. Without any hesitation, she sprinkled the dust of the golden amber on the spine of the sword, plating the blade with a layer of bright gold. Just as Huaishur tried to turn his head and shake off the tattered book covering his face, he saw Crow backhanded the sword and stabbed it into the crack in her chest. Huaishur was stunned. Again? Without giving him a chance to talk nonsense, Huaishur felt a fanatical light ignite in the deepest part of his body, erupting from the inside out and engulfing him. The slender blade pierced into the crack and penetrated his body inch by inch, but did not come out of his back, as if it was swallowed by his body. Until the end, it disappeared. Tick! A crisp sound came from the pocket watch in Crow's hand. The time was exactly right. Good wind, with force, send you to heaven. Crow took a step back and revealed a joyful smile. Welcome hell, silly boy. In that instant, after swallowing the endless light and heat, Huaishur convulsed violently and roared involuntarily. In his body, darkness surged like an ocean, spewing out from the crack in his chest. The death poison and ashes that had been brewing for an unknown amount of time turned into a tide and soared into the sky, firmly bound in this basement. Then, along the array inside the spirit coffin, it flowed mightily and covered the entire stone essence hall, enveloping this huge building like a black curtain. Under the afternoon sun, the originally magnificent stone essence hall seemed to have sunk into hell in an instant. It turned into a ghost realm, and in the core of the secret instrument, Huaishur raised his head in horror and looked at his chest. In front of his chest, the crack began to spread, as if it was growing, spreading inch by inch until it swallowed his entire chest and disappeared. Then it was his limbs, his head. In the endless flow of darkness, Crow tilted his head and observed the magnificent and strange situation in front of him, grinning. Huaishur had already disappeared. In a last moment, in a daze, he seemed to feel himself beginning to fall. At the same time, far away, almost equivalent to Australia on the other side of the present world, in the endless yellow sand, the Sand King, holding the golden amber, ascended the altar. Facing the incoming storm, the old man raised the resplendent miracle crystal in his hand up high. Today I hereby pray, towards the eternally dry desert beneath his feet, towards the cruel and tyrannical sky above his head. He roared, using all his strength and all the correction points accumulated by the past Sand Kings to make a declaration. With the power of the past Sand Kings, I hereby pray. Please bestow your blessings, clean water, fertile land, and warm wind. Amidst the sound of his skin cracking and shattering, the old man's mottled white hair danced. In the violent wind that rose out of nowhere, he roared, May the fertile earth descend upon this place. May the Holy Spirit of Omnipotence operate in this barren world of men. Thus the world rumbled. As he raised his hands high, the golden amber glowed with a blazing light. Resplendent blessings soared into the sky, turning into a golden light that could be seen even in the depths of the 9th level of hell. It propped up the sky here, establishing a fertile land that would not last for eternity. The Sand King roared, and his body quickly bent down. However, in the decaying body, a huge miracle emerged again. It turned into a blurry shadow that moved on the throne in the sky. It looked down at the land that was eternally barren and could not help but shed 2 streams of murky tears. His tears fell into the air and turned into rain. Thunder suddenly spread, and then a torrential rain fell out of the sky, covering the entire area around Canberra. The rain of blessings that surged with resplendent golden light covered the sky and the earth. The violent wind rose again, blowing away the dry wind and sand, revealing the pitch-black fertile land below. The clouds stretched out amidst the thunder, and the lightning seemed to light up the pale sky, returning it to a clear blue. Under the washing of the rain, many stubborn diseases were healed without medicine, and many souls in despair had a glimmer of hope. The old and young faces raised their heads to look at the weary figure on the altar. The Sand King staggered a step and instantly fell down, falling from the altar and into the mud. The people beside him did not have time to support him. They went forward in shock, but the old man pushed them away. He threw himself into the mud again and knelt on the ground. His trembling fingers picked up the mud on the ground, as well as a new sprout that had sprouted from the mud. As if he had found a treasure, he raised his head and showed the hope in his hands to the people around him in ecstasy. The dazed faces froze on the spot. "It's salvation, children!" He laughed loudly, holding up this new glimmer of hope, but he could not help but shed tears of excitement. Our salvation has come. In 2110 AD, the fourth Sand King gave up all of his correction values and used the golden amber to modify the present world. 1/5 of Australia was reborn. An unparalleled achievement was established here. Compared to this magnificent feat that was enough to cause the entire realm to raise its eyebrows, everything else became insignificant. No one noticed. At the same time, someone used the dust of the golden amber as a guide, using this ritual of the same origin as a cover, silently began to advance. It also concealed the terrifying disaster that would erupt because of this. This was the only thing that Crow did not tell others. If one wanted to isolate the enormous influence and gravity of the Book of Destiny, it would be useless no matter how many red strings were wrapped around it. Even if it was only temporary, only when one advanced could the restlessness of the Book of Destiny be completely vented. At that time, the entire world would be affected by this advancement, and if this interference was revealed in the present world, it would undoubtedly be a terrifying disaster. A disaster that was enough to completely defeat Huai Shi and cause him to fall into complete despair would descend upon the present world, upon everyone's heads. It was the 6th day of the 12th month of the year 2110, for 21 p.m. From this moment on, the terrifying memory that would be known by many as the darkest day officially began amidst countless laments and screams that were about to emerge. In the beginning, no one noticed the arrival of the disaster. Everything operated as usual, and for most people, this day was no different from any other time. After waking up early, finishing his gun practice and his winter vacation homework, Yuan Zhao once again confirmed that his cousin had gone out to attend a fan meeting today and would not be back before nightfall, so no one would disturb him. Then, she hurriedly hid in her room, closed the door, and locked the door. He quickly turned on his computer and skillfully sent a notice on Weibo and WeChat. Finally, he activated the live broadcast software. "Hello, friends in front of the television. I'm your friend, Ultimate Yuan." In the crisp, youthful voice, a cute 2D, cat-eared young man's avatar appeared vividly in front of the many live broadcast viewers. Countless bullet screen comments instantly flooded the screen, and some rich people even sent him a rocket to celebrate today's live broadcast. Although it had not been long since the live broadcast, Yuan Zhao quickly became famous with his amazing results in FPS games, occupying a place of his own on the fighting cock platform. He even had female fans. He had female fans. He had female fans. Important things should be said 3 times. There were even cute young ladies who sent him messages to invite him to dinner. Yuan Zhao, who had been beaten up by his cousin since he was young, could not afford this. Although he hesitated and did not accept, his enthusiasm for the live broadcast was gradually rising. Then, let's not talk nonsense. Let's start today's main topic. Yuan Zhao quickly opened the game software, and in the familiar melodious music, the client of Eternal Brand, Infinite World Showdown was opened. The reason why the popularity was so high today was because Yuan Zhao had announced in advance that he would open a 1,000 card pack in the Eternal Brand's New Year's commemorative pool. It should be noted that with the black-hearted nature of Super Shurji, there was no way he would open a pool where 10 consecutive hits were guaranteed to drop SSR during the new year. In fact, the drop rate of the Flash Gold card was so low that it made one's hair stand on end. This time, the commemorative pool for the new year would last for a week. It was said that the drop rate of the Flash Gold card would increase to around 1%, and there would be various out-of-print cards entering the pool. However, at the same time, the price was ridiculously high. It was more than 10 times more expensive than the physical card packs. 5 cards for a pack would cost 900 summer dollars. Although all the card packs that were open online would quickly send the physical card into the user's hands, there was no need to worry about getting nothing. However, you had to be able to get something good out of it. Otherwise, you would not be able to cry even if you wanted to. Ordinary, poor Eternal Brand players would feel a chill on their scalp when they saw this kind of card pool and would look at it carefully. It was only at this time that the rich players would make their grand entrance and spend a lot of money to prove how bored and rich they were. And for someone like Yuan Zhao, who was rich and bored to come open 1,000 card packs, he would naturally attract the attention of the majority of the audience. He opened the app and quickly reloaded. Following the sound of a text message that made Yuan Zhao's heart ache, all the pocket money he had saved for the past 2 years had turned into 1,000 card packs and appeared on the screen. If his cousin knew about this, she would break his legs. Fortunately, he could still sell those gold cards to replenish his health after the opening. Otherwise, he would really have to eat dirt. He forcefully suppressed the pain in his heart and forced a smile. He coughed twice, then, "Let's start the next card pack." Suddenly, there was a flood of comments. There were even 2 gay people who were sucking Udi among them. Naturally, they were all muted by Yuan Zhao. Under the live broadcast window, the preset bets were opened. They were betting on how many oranges Yuan Zhao would get. Naturally, there was no one in the column of 100 oranges. Many people wanted to take the risk of getting 50 oranges. Most people carefully chose 30 oranges or 20 oranges. Now, the entire gambling scene was changing rapidly. Many people who were watching the show wanted to gamble and win some official chicken feed. The atmosphere seemed to be very lively. After resting for a while, Yuan Zhao moved the mouse and opened the first pack with high expectations. "Let's have a good start." As the young man roared, the blue sky and white clouds rushed to his face. There was a burst of laughter and mockery in the comments. Many people comforted him. "The drop rate is so low. It's normal that the first pack doesn't appear." Yuan Zhao didn't care and opened the second pack. It was still blue sky and white clouds. This time, the comments were sparse and everyone was focused on watching. Yuan Zhao still calmly clicked the mouse. The third pack, blue sky and white clouds. The fourth pack, blue sky and white clouds. The fifth pack, blue sky and white clouds. The sixth pack, blue sky and white clouds. The seventh pack, the eighth pack, the ninth pack, until the 100th pack, it was all blue sky and white clouds. There was no flash gold card, and the best result was a Paradise Prince card that was out of print. Why the F***CK did Yuan Zhao want this? But he could use it to please his cousin later. Today's a little strange. Yuan Zhao raised his hand and wiped the sweat on his forehead. He began to feel nervous. He moved his wrist and clicked the mouse again. 110 bags, 120 bags, 130 bags. When the 100th pack was opened, the live broadcast room had fallen into a dead silence. Yuan Zhao began to rage. What's with the drop rate of Super Shurji? Did they secretly change it? 200 packs of flash gold, oranges can't appear. He slammed the keyboard angrily, turned around, and took a bottle of mineral water from the fridge and drank it in one gulp. Then he washed his face and hands formally, burned incense, and prayed. After a long time, he finally calmed down. He returned to the computer and squeezed out a smile. "Sorry for the long wait, everyone. Come, let's continue." The comments were full of sympathy. There were also many people who urged the streamer to persevere. Yeah, maybe he's still holding on to his luck. Yuan Zhao waved his hand casually. "Have you seen 10 flash gold cards in a pack? Today, I'll let you see." Then, when the 300th pack was opened, there was only a sigh of pity left in the live broadcast room. It's rare to see a streamer like this. To be honest, I'm guessing that the person in front of the screen is a nun. What's with the official routine? Streamer, what have you done to anger the heavens? 300 packs of flash gold still can't appear? Yesterday, there were 4 flash gold cards in the 200 packs next door. Streamer, did you do something wrong? Hurry up and go pray. Don't be afraid. This is just a technical adjustment of the card pool. Don't be afraid. Yuan Zhao forced himself to calm down and gulped. This time, he directly changed the mode and opened 10 packs at a time. 10 packs passed, 20 packs passed. When the 90 packs passed, the live broadcast room was suddenly greeted with a burst of noise. Suddenly, a golden light jumped out from the exploding packs. The rapidly flipping cards brewed a bright golden color, causing countless people to cheer in ecstasy. Flash gold! Flash gold! Flash gold! Oh, the streamer finally appeared. The streamer has dropped flash gold. My youth is over, I knew it. How could it not drop flash gold? Yuan Zhao also breathed a sigh of relief and squeezed out a smile. But before he could laugh out loud, he saw that the golden light on the spinning card quickly faded and turned into a bronze color. Dead silence suddenly fell. In the long silence, Yuan Zhao frantically rubbed his eyes, constantly looking away and back again. He suspected that he was hallucinating. The bullet screen in the live broadcast room had already exploded. Amazing. I've only seen silver turn to gold in my life, but I've never seen gold turn to bronze. F***CK. This is a F***King spectacular sight. Streamer, your life is worth it. I've never seen someone so miserable in all these years. Gold turned to bronze. The F***King gold card turned to bronze. Yuan Zhao almost couldn't hold back his anger. He struggled to look at the table, almost scaring the birds in the trees outside the window. The birds were also looking down blankly at the little idiot in the room. When the card finally flipped over, Yuan Zhao had already fallen into numbness. Battle of the Stars, Judge Fine. I'll be in your hands for the rest of my life, you bastard. He wiped his sorrowful tears, choked, and forced himself to cheer up. I don't King believe that I can't drop an orange today. Don't be afraid. It's just a technical adjustment. A technical adjustment. In his anger, he directly used up all his pocket money and bet it all on the live broadcast room's betting table. 450,000. Bet that I'll get at least 10 oranges today. Let's see if you dare to follow. Do you dare to follow? The market changed rapidly. The odds plummeted or rose rapidly. And in an instant, the popularity soared. What was this little bit of pain compared to the torrential rain in Africa? Don't be afraid. At least I still have dreams. My turn, draw a card. Yuan Zhao ignored the call from his cousin on his phone. Today, he summoned the courage he had never had in 14 years. He bet his life and began to open packs again. This time, the live broadcast room was silent. All the audience and bullet screen quietly witnessed this brave warrior's card draw. 600 packs, no oranges. 700 packs, no oranges. By the time he reached 800 packs, even the chicken executives were alarmed and put his live broadcast room at the top of the homepage. Young man gambles millions. Can he get an orange today? 900 packs, no oranges. Yuan Zhao's eyes were bloodshot, and his whole body slammed on the table with all his might. He completely ignored the concerned voice of the servant outside the door, moved the mouse, and continued. In melodious song from the player, Yuan Zhao was not defeated by bad luck. Yuan Zhao stood up, and Yuan Zhao continued to move forward. Yuan Zhao, draw a card. Then blue sky and white clouds, blue sky and white clouds, blue sky and white clouds. When his trembling hand pulled out the last pack, the bullet screen was filled with the whines and cheers of the gamblers. Yuan Zhao could no longer hold back his sobs. Holding on to his last glimmer of hope, Yuan Zhao used all his strength and pressed his finger. Wah! The sound of fate's judgment came from the speaker. Silver normal. Mother ***y. Yuan Zhao finally couldn't hold back his tears of grief and indignation. He collapsed on the chair and stared at the blue sky and white clouds on the screen. Why can't I get an orange? The sound of his cousin's hurried footsteps finally came from outside the door. It was as if his death was imminent. 2 lines of clear tears fell from the corner of the young man's eyes. He knew that he was going to die today. At the same time, the same despair was constantly descending on everyone's head all over the world. Whether it was cards of all ages, Silent Crown, or even the famous mobile game, Steel Throne. It wasn't just mobile games and tabletop games, but also popular desktop RPG games on the dark web, as well as every online game, web-based game, and gambling game, from Dongsha to the Americas, from Egypt to the Russian Federation, and from Rome to everywhere in the world. On this day, after 420, on this day, full of misery and gloominess, the same despair, the same darkness, fell on the head of a stray dog who was hoping for a fluke. Every probability game ushered in the worst consequences. One after another, sunken ships sank into the bottomless card pool. It was as if everyone's money was being swallowed up. There was not a single sound. While every die was equal to a great success, it also increased the probability of a great failure by 1,000 times. More than 10,000 character cards met the fate of being torn apart today. Everyone who tried to upgrade their equipment received the notification of upgrade failed, equipment destroyed, in unprecedented despair. On this day, in these cruel 24 hours from the present world to the border, not a single person, not a single living thing, not a single thing that could move, could draw an SSR from the bottomless black card pool. No one. Even if the card pool had a 100% drop rate, it would still be stuck, shut down, and disconnected. Disaster was spreading. Disaster was descending on every player's head. Countless sunken ships screamed in agony and roared in anger. The once insufferably arrogant seals let out their final sorrowful cry. The darkest day had finally ushered in its climax. Huaishir, on the other hand, was still in a daze. He heard a sound that gradually rang in his ears. Ah, I've prepared this plot for so long, and I've finally written it. How delightful! 2 chapters in one, a total of 7,200 words. Since there are double events on the 7th day of the month, please give me your monthly votes. Chapter 477. Since ancient times, who taught the Tao? Inexplicably, a low voice echoed in Huaishir's ears, rousing him from his stupor. Then he discovered that he really was falling deeper and deeper into the darkness. Even though there was no wind blowing in his face, and there was no sense of weightlessness, he still felt this way. He was falling, in a low voice of the chanting. When he listened carefully, he discovered that there was no sound coming from his ears. That sound came from within, from the surging of his soul. Countless origin substances collided with each other, creating a sound that was like a tidal wave, bringing with it a distant and fleeting echo. It reverberated in Huaishir's consciousness, like an electric current flowing through his nerves. It constantly triggered switch after switch, pulling at the floating characters in his memory. Word by word, it pieced together a soundless sound that was gradually rising from the depths of his soul. Even a rock that couldn't think would probably be able to comprehend the meaning behind it, right? That voice, Huaishir's soul, was asking this question. At the very beginning of the distant era, who was it that had passed down this scene to future generations? In that instant, the darkness in front of Huaishir's eyes suddenly opened up, as if countless clouds of black fog were rapidly dissipating. It should be said that Huaishir's soul had finally broken through the curtain that had been covering his eyes. In this brief moment, even if it was just a moment, it was indescribably fast. He caught a glimpse of it. Under the encirclement of countless bubbles, a magnificent scene formed by countless overlapping arrays, a turbulent flow of nothingness outlined by streaks of light. It was like a grand river, a deep cave, and an indescribably large cornerstone. Inexplicably, Huaishir came to a conclusion in his heart. That was a stone pillar. If one were to use human knowledge and common sense to determine this, then that object of nothingness was without a doubt the stone pillar that had risen from the depths of the distant abyss and propped up the entire world. But the stone pillar dissipated in the blink of an eye like an illusion, no longer visible. Huaishir felt a wave of dizziness, once again falling into a deep sleep that he could not see the end of. When he opened his eyes again, he heard the whisper that came from the depths of his soul after a long time of brewing. Up and down are not formed. Why do you test it? How did all this come to be before heaven and earth were formed? Then Huaishir saw hell. In this abyss formed by endless depths, there were countless layers of broken walls and dilapidated walls in the eternal darkness. It was a tragic scene. It was only now that Huaishur could confirm that he was indeed falling. It fell from the realm of reality like a speck of dust. Then it slowly passed through the layers of borders and finally fell into hell. He headed deeper into the depths of hell. Just like that, he floated in the darkness like a feather. He gazed at the bustling scene as it disappeared into the deserts, oases, and isolated islands at the border. The steel city under the thick smoke, the giant elephant that carried the entire settlement on its back as it walked on the wasteland, the deserted town that was connected by countless lone towers above the sea of clouds, the busy and noisy mines in the vacuum, and even the small villages that were as beautiful and exquisite as works of art. Those lonely, noisy, beautiful, or decadent worlds were also rapidly fading away. Finally, he embraced the abyss. In the darkness, there were only countless illusionary scenes that appeared and disappeared. He caught a glimpse of the outlines of hell, but when Huaishur wanted to take a closer look, they were once again hidden in the darkness. Huaishur could only determine his position and depth through the lighthouses that the Astronomical Association had placed between different depths. Those flashing lights were the only things that could determine his position and depth. Just like that, he passed through the edge of Zarathustra's great secret apparatus and entered the shallow zone of hell. His speed became faster and faster. Soon he passed by the abyssal mirror that extended from the border of White City. He then passed through the massive walls that were deliberately piled up by the ruins of hell and entered the deepest zone that was closest to the realm of reality. Here, countless large groups of abyssals occupied each other's territories, fighting and killing each other. They were either allies or enemies. He could vaguely see the soul light of the ascendants floating in it, but it was difficult to see the details. Only the tens of thousands of chaotic zones that resembled battlefields flashed past Huaishur's eyes. Then, he fell into the withering zone, unable to turn back. As if he had sunk into the deep sea, in the faint light, Huaishur saw huge and terrifying shadows colliding with each other. He also saw countless corrosives lurking in the corners of the abyss like weeds, and even the predators that roamed their own territories. The dynasties of the rulers were built here. Like a black hole in the abyss, they expanded their own gravity in all directions, displaying their unique supreme crown. Some were cruel, some were bloody, some were strange. Leviathan stretched itself out here, stirring the thousands of tentacles of the endless sea. Evelet sprinkled the brutal and cruel light. The king of withers sat on his throne in his deathly territory. The dragon of decay entrenched itself in the kingdom of corpses. The purgatory factory owners gathered here to form the largest nightmare workshop in hell. The titans of the sea fought in the shadows. The jesters of the abyss and the scholars of darkness hid themselves in the darkness. All kinds of scenes came before him and quickly disappeared. As if someone had noticed the arrival of a passerby, a pair of cold eyes looked up and fell on Huaishur, who was gradually getting further away. They reached out to grab him, but it was too late, so they looked away indifferently. Huaishur had fallen into the dark abyss. In the absolute darkness, Huaishur felt that he had brushed past countless behemoths. But when he looked around carefully, he could not see anything. It was as if there was only a void here, but there seemed to be countless predators hiding behind scenes. It was silent. In the dead silence, a bolt of lightning suddenly lit up from afar. Then, countless cruel silhouettes were illuminated. In an instant, the prey in the center was torn apart and quickly returned to silence. There were no more signs. A blank voice sounded behind Huaishur. There's actually someone here? But when Huaishur turned around, he only had time to see the outline of a traveler covered in dust. Then, he quickly became dizzy and felt that he was falling faster. Deeper and deeper. But was there any deeper? Did the legendary silent abyss really exist? Huaishur did not know, nor did he know how long he had been falling. The falling trend gradually stopped. He stopped in a seemingly eternal desolation and looked around. When he looked up, he seemed to be able to glimpse the light of the present realm from a distance. He had no idea where this place was. Or rather, it was hard to tell whether what he saw along the way was reality or illusion. At this moment, whether he was in hell or sleeping in a dream, he could not tell. But in the decadent ruins, when he took 2 steps, he saw the ruins of a collapsed building and even a broken sign. It was full of cracks and rust. The sign of the Astronomical Society was indeed covered in dust. Huaisher reached out and touched it, and it was broken just like that. Until now, when he looked around the ruins, he could vaguely distinguish the former appearance of Jinling. But was this real or fake? In shock, Huaisher staggered back a step, and a broken notebook fell from the ashes of the skeleton. The withered pieces of paper flew out like leaves, and then quickly dissipated in the air. Only 2 pieces of wreckage fell to the ground, and one could still vaguely make out the last words left behind in the fading ink. Looking back on the past, it is full of shameful past. On the fragments that quickly turned into dust, only the last words were left, almost like repentance. I was born as a human. I am very sorry. But these words of farewell were crudely scratched out several times with a pen and erased. In the end, a huge comment was added between the lines. Concise and comprehensive. Only 2 words. Bullshit. A gust of wind blew through the air, sweeping away the dust and everything in front of him. The huge ruins quickly disappeared into thin air and turned into nothingness. In the darkness, only a distant shadow quietly stared at him. It was like a smile, so comforting. Raising his arm, he waved goodbye to the young man in the distance. But when Huaisher chased after him, the figure had disappeared. There, only a long sword covered in dust was left. It stabbed into the stone at an angle, waiting quietly for a long time. The outline was so familiar and so unbelievable to Huaisher. When Huaisher reached out and grabbed the heavy handle, a clear sound rose from the silent iron. He shook off the dust. In the deepest part of the darkness, the innermost layer of the dream, the most floating chaos of the illusion, the rust on the sword of virtue fell off layer by layer. It was no longer as broken as before, and a solemn and sacred outline was revealed. On the blade, a bright light lit up, illuminating Huaisher's face. The dust cleared, and the light was born. A ray of light shot into the sky, cutting through the darkness with unbelievable sharpness, dispelling the nightmare, tearing the illusion, and breaking through the chaos of ignorance. It made Huaisher truly open his eyes from the darkness. The long night had come to an end. In that instant, within the surging tide of darkness, the massive array under the Stone Essence Museum let out a mighty roar, like the sound of a bell, echoing throughout the entire Xinhai. Even far away in Jinling, one could observe the origin-substance fluctuations that erupted here, and even that grand and sacred sound could be heard. In the garden, the old man who was bending over to repair the grass raised his head in shock. His figure suddenly became illusory, and then disappeared into the air. Immediately afterwards, the darkness that enveloped the Stone Essence Museum suddenly dissipated. Everything returned to the light of day. A naked old man appeared again, looking around in shock. He didn't have time to feel his first breath and that heartfelt joy. Feng Shu subconsciously picked up the box on the ground and used it to block in front of him. For the first time in his life, he had experienced awkwardness. And in the basement, amidst the rapidly shrinking darkness, the sound of a heartbeat could be heard again. The collapsing darkness quickly condensed into a blurry human figure. It was like a stone statue carved out of obsidian. Cracks quickly appeared and spread, covering the entire figure. Inch by inch, it shattered, revealing the youth who seemed to have been reborn. Huaisher finally woke up from the long nightmare. He stared blankly at the ceiling above his head, unable to react to what had happened. Who am I? Where am I? What am I doing? Until the sound of a camera shutter woke him up. Along with the flashing lights, the phone recorded the silly look on his face after the advancement. And right in front of Huaisher, the woman who had been waiting for a long time looked down at him and happily reached out her hand to him. Welcome back, silly boy. Huaisher was confused for a long time before he finally reacted. But in a hurry, he didn't know how to respond. so he just instinctively held her hand. Then he realized that he was completely different from before. Yes, young Master Ming, Huaisha smiled. I'm back. Chapter 478. Advancement Get. Coffin Repair Get. Feng Shu's Independent Get. The three goals were suddenly completed, but Huaisha didn't feel the slightest bit of reality. He could only confirm it repeatedly. Seeing that Feng Shu could finally walk out of the Stone Essence Hall and no longer be bound here, Huaisha finally breathed a sigh of relief. He didn't feel the ecstasy he expected. Instead, he felt peace and joy from the bottom of his heart. It was a success. Then, it was time for the main event. After being dragged back to the basement by Crow, he began to test young Master Ming's various abilities. The first was strength and speed. These 2 points didn't need to be mentioned at all. With so many high-grade materials as a foundation, if Huaisha still couldn't reach the standard after his advancement, he should just cut his own neck and apologize. First was the strength test. The average level here referred to the average level of the combat abilities stigmata, except for a few strange stigmata that strengthened their strength to the limit. Huaisha wouldn't be inferior to any level 3 sublimator. If he added the drummer's buff and drummer used footwork, Huaisha could simply arm wrestle with the previous air lie. Well, although it would be troublesome if he used too much strength and broke his wrist. But before that, it was enough for air lie to suffer. The next test was endurance. It was terrifying, without taking into account other skills. After continuously punching with all his strength for half an hour and smashing the steel plate in front of him into a pulp, Huaisha didn't feel the slightest bit tired except for a little pain in his hand. If it was the original, he would have been exhausted. That's normal. Originally, Hill Ghost recovery speed was frighteningly high. Now that you've advanced, if you don't consider the limits of your bones and muscles, you can maintain a highly efficient output for 24 hours. Crow rolled a pen on his wings and tapped on the notebook. However, being able to break even is already very scary. Next, Huaisha was best at speed. Limited by the scope of the room, it was impossible to test long-distance running. However, it was more based on endurance, so there was no need to spend time testing it. Today's test was more inclined towards Huaisha's improvement in explosive power and short-distance sprinting. When Huaisha easily completed 6 leaps between the ceiling and the wall and appeared at the other end of the basement like a ghost, he couldn't help but feel a burst of comfort from the bottom of his heart. I'm done. He was certain that he was now above Van Helsing, who was once at the peak of rank 3. He could do all the techniques that Van Helsing could do in the past, and even more easily. As for the attack speed, after repeated attempts and adjustments by Huaisha, he was now able to adjust the virtual metronome in his mind to a terrifying 416 beats per minute. Twice as fast as a conventional metronome. Under ideal conditions, Huaisha, who was fully focused, could launch 6 attacks in 1 second, and that was more than enough. With the increase in his muscle strength and speed, the core technique that he had learned from Elder Luo was naturally integrated. Now, the time he needed to accumulate power had been shortened to the limit. 3-degree chords were at his fingertips. As long as he prepared in advance for 1 second, he could easily perform a 9-chord chord that overlapped 5 notes at the same time. Huaisha could still work harder, but what limited him was not his ability, but the number of weapons. The original Sword of Virtue had also been integrated into the stigmata as a material during the advancement. Like the sacrificial knife, he didn't need to carry it with him anymore. He could pull it out from his soul with just a thought. Other than the rope of sorrow that wasn't good at direct attacks, there were the axe of wrath, the sacrificial knife, the spear of compassion, the hammer of pain, and the sword of virtue. These were the equipment that Huaisha was most comfortable with. As for the other border relics, even if he could barely use them, they didn't have such a sense of harmony. There was no doubt that even if it was only an improvement in the basic physical fitness, it was a qualitative change. And as a support-type stigmata, after young Master Ming's advancement, the original Mountain Ghost talent had also been strengthened. It had advanced to life diversion, and its ability to survive had been further improved. As for the Een Soul, which was one with the mountain ghost. Its ability had also been improved death absorption. Back when she was still a ghost, Huaishir had been able to extract ash from a person's fear and despair before they died. Now, her ability had improved to the point where she was able to extract origin substance from the ash in reverse. Even if Huaishir's technique was still too rusty, and this conversion efficiency was less than 1/10, it was still enough to shock people. Isn't this like killing people to recover mana? Huaishir was stunned. This skill didn't seem like it came from a righteous sect at all. Why was his style becoming more and more like a villain? No, it seemed like he had been walking the path of a villain from the very beginning. Less than 1/10 of the conversion efficiency can only be said to be better than nothing. Perhaps it can be supplemented when necessary, but if you really want to rely on this to survive, you might as well become an evil soul. Extract ashes from the soul, and then extract origin substance from the ashes. After these two conversions, how much can you refine? The crow didn't seem to care at all. The Northern European evil souls can suck people out as soon as they catch them. Every breath counts, and the efficiency is more than 98%. Compared to them, you're just a little brother. In the end, it's just a bonus to the young master of life. Don't worry about that. Let's get to the main point, okay? Release your stigmata. When Huaishir heard this, he took a deep breath and finally activated the sacred mark in his body. It seemed to instantly turn into mist and spread out. Immediately after, the mist condensed back into a human figure. After a moment of floating, Huaishir's silhouette appeared again, standing in the middle of the basement. He looked at his hands. Under the thin t-shirt in front of his chest, the tear that had disappeared after the advancement had reappeared. Streaks of pure white lines extended out like tattoos, overlapping with each other, wrapping around the limbs, covering the fingertips, and even extending to the collar, outlining an indescribable emblem and coat of arms on the neck. Incredible. It was as if he had lost weight. Huaishir earnestly took a few steps forward. He felt lighter than he had ever felt before, but it wasn't to the point where he couldn't control his body. It was as if, with just a thought, he could bang. Huaishir's vision went dark. He slammed into the wall that was originally 10 steps away and fell backwards. It happened too quickly. He didn't even have time to react. As if he had expected this, the crow laughed gloatingly. He lowered his head and looked at Suchun. After the young master of life's sacred mark is activated, your body will become the purest conductor of origin substances. You won't lose any of your origin substances, and your origin substances can directly interfere with your body. To a certain extent, it really is quite easy to think about. However, it's best if you don't think about things that are not suitable for children when you activate it. Otherwise, you'll make a fool of yourself, just like those evil immortals in the legends. I can teach you Midas Touch, but when you use it, you definitely can't think about that big rock at the entrance of the village. Once this thought is planted in your mind, there's no way to stop it. Huaishir's face instantly turned green. He tried his best to control himself, but his efforts were futile. Images that were not allowed to appear in the Book of Destiny kept appearing in his mind. All he wanted to do was press this stupid crow to the ground and give it a good beating. Finally, the crow had seen enough of a joke. He raised his wings and pointed in the direction of Huaishir's original position. Look over there. Huaishir raised his head and looked over. Then he saw himself. No, it should be said that it was his former self. Just like when you wave your hand under a light, you would see your fingers leave behind after images. Huaishir was actually able to see the faint outline of himself that he had left behind in his original position. These outlines had followed Huaishir's advance and were evenly spread out along the path that he had left behind. They didn't disappear for a long time, as if they had already been engraved into the air. And when Huaishir got up, he was able to see the faint outline of his body on the ground. Every time he took a step, he would leave behind a faint shadow. It was like a picture taken by a high-speed camera. What is this? This is the qualitative change in the path of Heaven's Inquisition after reaching the 3rd level. It is also young Arbiter of Life's most important innate skill, Shadow Burial. That's it. Huaishir was in disbelief. He didn't understand why the crow was so serious about this, and he didn't know what the use of an innate skill that left behind afterimages was. But just as he was in a daze, he discovered, to his surprise, that the afterimages that he had left behind in his original position had begun to move on their own accord. As soon as Huaishir relaxed his control, they began to wander around the room. Some were running around, some were lying on the ground, some were standing upside down, and some were even scratching their feet. Very quickly, as the origin substance was cut off, the afterimages quickly dissipated. They were like bubbles that had been popped. Do you know why the path of Heaven's Inquisition is the most effortless and difficult to control path in the celestial genealogy? It is simply too difficult to smoothly unleash this power. There are simply too many things that are required. The crow tilted his head and glanced at him. Why don't you look at your right hand? Huaishir lowered his head suspiciously and looked at his right hand. Only then did he discover that the Nibelungen ring had disappeared. At the base of his index finger, a faint golden rune that looked like a tattoo had actually merged with the sacred insignia. It was as if the sacred insignia had been attached to his body without any gaps. And inside, the space, which had already reached its limit, began to expand once again. In the past, 3 ghosts would have been enough to fill up the ranks, but now, with Huaishir's improvement, the number of ghosts had increased by several times. And in the middle, a new layer of origin substance had appeared, slowly brewing and absorbing the young arbiter of fate's origin substance to replenish the army. Huaishir felt that he could use death absorption to replenish the negative origin substance at any time. After Huaishir had become a 3rd-grade young arbiter of fate, the upper limit of the space had increased by a frightening amount. Originally, when Huaishir was a mountain ghost, he could only create 3 ghosts. Now, however, those 3 ghosts had simultaneously advanced along with Huaishir, becoming mountain ghosts. And under each mountain ghost, 3 new openings had appeared. How come it was like a pyramid scheme, where it could be developed offline? You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.